Let's get peppy. We are continuing the week of 1,000 guests, actually 3, with guest number 2 on Ep110. This is the famous, the estimable Bill Wyman, former assistant managing editor of NPR Radio, National Public Radio. Now he's a lecturer at Sydney University, and he writes for Sydney Morning Herald, and he does our podcast. Thank you so much for coming, Bill Wyman.
And this is the most exciting part of all of that. The most challenging.
I know it's challenging their wording with me sometimes, so I accept that.
There's a double meaning to that word.
It certainly is. Now, as I always say, we've got a lot to get on with, so I do want to get on because I know we've got an exciting new segment. We don't have a sting for you, Bill, but next year we're going to give you a sting.
Oh, really? For what?
For Bill's Culture Corner.
Oh, Bill's Culture Corner. Exactly. Yes. Right. Yeah, I can do that.
Very excited about this one. Yeah. And I have nothing prepared, so I'm going to add nothing to those segments.
Because people should know that what I've done most of my life is I've been an arts editor. I've always been a reporter and things like that, but my career is kind of an arts editor, an arts and media editor, basically. So I do have a pretty good grounding in American music, TV, movies, books, theater, that sort of stuff.
That is obvious because you just wrote a 38,000-word article about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which we're going to get to in the Culture Corner.
Okay, we'll get to that.
But first, I've already recorded, this is a bit weird, I've already recorded Pep111 with Melina, which is going to be the one after yours. This is actually going to be a double edition, but I thought to myself, no one wants a 4.5-hour podcast. So I'm going to split up into 2, even though I've recorded Melina's first and she's coming after yours. And with Melina, we spoke about Twitter for like over an hour. We spoke about Twitter and Elon Musk, as you guys will discover in 2 days' time. We'll be posting out on Sunday. But you told me off the air that you're not just talking about Twitter and the problems with Twitter. You're getting on your bike. You're
doing something about it.
You've gone to Mastodon.
Exactly. Well, and if people care about Mastodon, I can give you a little précis about it. So my issue with Twitter is that Musk can do whatever he wants. He has all this money. He's a smart guy. I really sort of have an issue. And it's his right to spend $44 billion on it and run it to the ground. But this thing where just before the election, he was encouraging people to vote for Republicans. He went to a big fundraiser for the woman who was running against Liz Cheney. And it's really obvious he's on the side of the bad guys. And journalists are I'm nonpartisan. I hate Democrats equal as much as Republicans. But right now the Republicans are on the side of breaking down American democracy. And given just a very small change of votes in America in the last midterms, we could have a much different, scarier future ahead of us. And the fact that Musk put himself on that side, that's it. So I encourage people to leave Twitter. But of course, it's a very useful professional thing, and we're doing it slow. But what Mastodon is sort of a mini Twitter. But the great thing about it is that there can be innumerable mini Twitters. So if you want to set up your own little server, which basically just means your own laptop, you can do one, or you can just join one. And basically it allows all these mini Twitter communities to form, and you can follow anybody on anyone else as well.
Okay, so it doesn't matter which island you're on, whatever you call them, instance, I think they're called. Whether it doesn't matter which instance you're on, you can follow anyone.
Yeah, you just look them up. And what they have is the names will have your @ name, and then it'll have @ your server. So there's a journalism one in America called JournaHost. So I'm at Hitsville at JournaHost. But I'm also on an Australian one, which is called, I think it's called Australian Social. And so I'm at Bill Wyman at aus.social. Okay. So it's kind of a double @ sign.
So and people can follow you on either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And whatever you say goes to everyone who follows you, regardless.
Me. Yeah. Okay. And then, but because there's all these independent little mini Twitters, mini Mastodons, they can block people or not block people as they want. So you can, in your community, you can join one and hold things to a certain standard. But if you don't like it, you can also join another one and do that.
Yeah.
So in theory, you could have a mini Mastodon, for example, and say, oh, well, we don't want any Donald Trump on this one. So they just block it. And if you want some, then just join a different one.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's kind of a smart thing. But one of the interesting things that we forget about the internet is that we complain about the algorithms and the manipulation and the feeds, but they're doing a lot of work for us. And it kind of reminds me of the very, very, very first days of Facebook, where you'd be on Facebook and it's like, oh, I don't really know anybody. And then you kind of look for someone and then look for someone. And then another group of friends gets on and you slowly build your community up. So that's the status that it's at now.
So what you're saying, in other words, let me just translate Bill for you. You would very much like the people who are watching this podcast to get onto Mastodon and say hi to you.
Oh, absolutely. No, that would be really great. And so my Australian one, as I said, is at Bill Wyman at aus.social. And then my screen name on Twitter and things like that is Hitsville, because I used to write a column called Hitsville, and that's at hitsville@journa.host. Yeah. Okay. And if you care about Twitter still, I'm always at Hitsville on Twitter as well.
Sure. So if you're a member of 2 or 3 different instances or islands or whatever, and you on each of them you are able to see different people and you follow different people on each of them. In your timeline, your home timeline, do you see all of them combined?
I haven't gotten that far yet. So the way I'm doing it now is I have one that I'm working on that's the basically the American one, because I still write some there. And then I'm slowly working on the Australian one as well. So I don't actually know.
Okay. All right. But at least in theory, this works very much like the original Twitter did way back when, 10 years ago, where you just had to build your followers.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then
it puts a little more control into it. Yeah. And what someone should do, not me, is set up like an Australian journalism one. I think that would be very useful. And so maybe I should talk to someone at the university, because that'd be very, very useful just to have that sort of community here.
Okay. I mean, when you say community, I mean, I don't quite get how you get the community in the island if you can just follow anyone from anywhere. How's that community developed?
But just assuming that journalists wants to talk to each other, because that's what people do. I mean, so all these film critics talk to each other, all these rock critics talk to each other, and so you assume that it'd be nice to have a journalism one. But of course, everyone can follow them too, because journalists want other people to follow them as well. But I guess there's going to be this other kind of new wrinkle in this, that it's going to be very prestigious, maybe, to be of a certain. To be a member on a certain one, but it really doesn't matter. I mean, who cares, really? So, but human nature being human nature, there's going to be a little bit of that, I think.
It sounds like this is going to develop into something, but we're not quite sure what yet. Like, we'll have to see as time goes on.
But I've been getting disenchanted with Twitter for all sorts of reasons. And I've really felt in the last few weeks that it's almost like one of those movies where it's kind of a horror movie, and all of a sudden the screen starts going, on Twitter. So I don't know if I told you this, but for a while, every day I was getting like posts saying, there's this writer I know in America called Connor Friedensdorf from The Atlantic, and then there's another guy.
I like him a lot.
And it would say Connor Friedersdorf, and this one other person follows Ben Dreyfuss. And Ben Dreyfuss is a drip journalist who is very attitudinal, and he got kind of semi-canceled for being an idiot at some point and tried to make that a big deal when he's really... So every day it would say, oh, they're following this guy. Oh, or they like... And I go, why are they all of a sudden telling... Why Ben Dreyfuss every day? So then I started taking screenshots and then tweeting this, saying, why does it keep happening? So then, I swear to God, I'm not making this up, I got this tweet, this tweet that says, Al Franken follows. Okay, you know Al Franken, the famous American. And it was a picture of, I don't know if you have this parlance in Australia, but in the San Francisco gay community, I think they do have the bears. Gay men who are bears.
Hairy
husky,
guys.
hairy, big.
I like hairy guys.
Okay, so it's like a bear photo Twitter thing. So it had this guy who was very beary and very muscular and hairy sitting in the car. And I thought, well, that's pretty odd, isn't it? Al Franken and this. So then every day for like 4 days, I got this Twitter thing. Al Franken follows, and it'd be a picture of this hairy, muscular, topless, presumably gay gentleman.
He's following him a lot.
But I don't know if that's true. I don't know if someone in Twitter was saying, oh, let's embarrass Al Franken, or someone made it up. Or maybe he's doing it because it's genuine, but he was doing it because of some joke. And it could be that he likes looking at hirsute topless men. But it just seemed very weird. And I have a lot of screenshots, so I'm not making this up. So there's been a lot of things like that on Twitter that I thought it was really going off the rails in certain ways. So I'm happy to be getting rid of it.
Fair enough. Okay, well, look, we should move on to some sort of
serious things.
So, well, no, that was very serious. But I'm sure it's very serious for Al Franken. Some standard political stuff before we move on to Bill's Culture Corner, which I'm very excited about. You were saying that we want to talk about the new Congress, the Congress next year, the incoming Congress. We're predicting the future a little bit about what's coming. Now, we don't know the final numbers yet. At this point in time, I'd be guessing 222 to 213, but it might be 1 or 2 seats out. So let's say a 7 to 9 seat majority for Republicans at this point in time. I should say, before I ask you to weigh into the details of this, that whatever number we end up with, don't think that's the actual number in Congress, because those numbers change fast. When you got that many people, they change a lot. There hasn't been a single day during the last Congress without a vacancy in the House.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it really does, because people have to remember there's 435 members.
Yeah.
So even if you just have a 1% crisis at any given time, that's 4 people right there.
Totally. There were 4 vacancies in the last Congress by February.
That is a great stat.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you got a 9-seat majority, there is every chance that there could be 5 deaths or special elections or whatever at some point in time. Not that I'm predicting it, but I'm just saying that number is going to change. It might change the other way, but it's going to change. So we should just don't get wedded to the 9-seat majority thing. That's not going to last for long.
People could be going to prison.
Yeah, well, they might be. Yes. But let's for now, let's just assume a 9-seat majority, and for argument's sake, and let's work from there. What are your thoughts? Let's start me off.
Well, it's going to be, if the future of American democracy weren't in the balance, it would be really fun to watch. Okay, that's the number one thing. All of these people have to remember that the degradation of particularly the Republican Party in America has really been proceeding apace. And so people like Kevin McCarthy, you can't even believe that they are actually where they are. And we have to remember that he came so close, of course. Remember, just before Paul Ryan.
Yeah.
And so he's going through, this is also delectable because this is a movie that Kevin McCarthy has seen before, except it's even worse this time because they have him by the, if you excuse the expression, short hairs, even more sharply than they did back then, and he lost back then.
Absolutely. I would say that one of the problems he has is that he has more members who are loyal to Trump than him. Trump is the actual leader. Is the actual leader of the House, not Kevin McCarthy. Even with Trump being on the nose at the moment, there's still significant support in the House, and Kevin McCarthy doesn't have any supporters whatsoever. So that's a problem.
And just so people understand, the House is famously unruly. The Senate is a relatively august body. The House is always unruly. There was these immensely famous, powerful people, Sam Rayburn, Tip O'Neill, who managed this by hook and crook. Pelosi has been, I think a lot of people consider her to be one of the most successful and, disciplined. Okay. And that she really ran it with an iron hand, but did it in a positive way. And the idea of someone like Kevin McCarthy, who doesn't even have the kind of the internal bone structure anyway to do something like that, and then being so victimized by these people, there's a really good chance he's going to end up in some sort of torture dungeon of Freedom Caucus debauchery, all at his expense. So that could be really fun to watch. Again, if it weren't for America being so vulnerable at the moment. Well,
a key difference between Pelosi's situation and Kevin McCarthy's situation is, as you say, she undoubtedly was one of the finest exponents of the skills necessary to be a speaker that we've seen for quite some time. Kevin McCarthy's problem is that, number one, he has no experience legislating whatsoever. You'd think someone who becomes a speaker has some experience legislating. He's done none, right, at all. He's been campaigning constantly for a decade, but he's never done any legislating. Like Paul Ryan was a legislator. Kevin McCarthy is not a legislator. That's the first problem. The second problem is his caucus aren't a legislating caucus. If you look at the bills that the Republicans have tried to pass over the past few years, it's basically been trying to end Obamacare over and over and over and over and over and over again. There's very little legislation experience within the House caucus. There's a few, not many. And so you got someone who doesn't really know how to legislate, leading people who don't really know how to legislate. So that leads a situation where there isn't much to do other than to make mistakes when trying to legislate, or to run investigations. They got lots of experience of that, and running political campaigns. It's not auspicious for what they might come up with, because now they're in a position where they can potentially legislate. I mean, I know that they're unlikely to do any deals with the Senate and with Joe Biden, but in the past, speakers could do deals we've seen no evidence that Kevin McCarthy's even capable of doing a deal, or his caucus would let him.
Yes, I think you're really right. And that kind of what I was getting at when I was saying originally that people shouldn't think, oh, he's the Speaker of the House, he's going to be this august figure. He just isn't. He's a very silly person. And speaking of which, do you know about the Kevin McCarthy deli yogurt business?
I really don't. Is this I was about to ask you, do you remember why he didn't become the Speaker the first time? I remember he was really close and he said something dumb.
Well, because the Freedom Caucus undercut him and then they had to...
Didn't he say something? He said something really dumb.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
I think it might, like, I'm not 100% sure about this. This is off the top of my head. But I think maybe it was when he said that, when he basically said that they took numbers off Hillary Clinton with the Benghazi investigation, and that was the reason she lost the election, or something like that. Like,
no, he said something. No, maybe it was about immigrant. You're right. He said something about immigrant. He said something very politically incorrect about it, and then that sucked the wind out.
I'll look at that while you're talking, because he said something anyway. But tell me about the deli yogurt.
No, this is incredibly fascinating because I'd heard about this. That the thing is that he would say there was something about he's a failed yogurt entrepreneur or something like this. Okay, so it turns out that when he was coming up, he was a small businessman. He'd been out there. He started a small business, and gosh darn it, he knew what government regulation was all about. And darn, when you're doing payroll and stuff like that, you're really learning how the government regulation just undermines small businesses. And here's the thing: he started that small business when he was 19, and he won the lottery, and he won $5,000 in the lottery. He put it into a small business, and then he sold that business, and by gosh, he put himself through college with it.
Wow,
that's
an impressive
the kind
story.
of entrepreneur. So the story actually is, you can tell by my tone of voice, is that all that's bullshit, right? Okay, so it turns out what the story is, and that when people went back and tried to fact check all this in terms of when the California lottery started and when he went to college and what his business license was, basically the story is that some of his relatives had a yogurt shop, and he apparently did something like put up a table in the corner and bought an ice machine and sold sandwiches for a while. Okay. And he never had a business license.
Yeah.
There's no evidence he ever hired employees or did payroll for them or anything like that. He talked about how he built up the business and stuff, but from the time the California lottery started to when he went into school was 1 year past. So this was not an epic growth thing or anything like this. And then finally, that when he, quote unquote, put himself through college, tuition at this Cal State Bakersfield at the time was about $200 a semester, and he was still living with his parents. Right. So it and I might have that. It might be he was living with his aunt and uncle or something like that. But he was living with his family and paying $200 a semester. So the whole thing of that is just incredibly questionable. And ever since then, he got a job working for a congressman. So he's been on the public payroll ever since. So even if what he said was half true, taking at the thing, he ran a little business for about 10 or 11 months, and it consisted of selling a few sandwiches off a table inside someone else's business.
Gotcha. Okay? He's not Elon Musk.
So this is who we're talking about.
By the way, I did find that thing about Kevin McCarthy. I think we're both right, because the Freedom Caucus definitely nobbled him, but also he was in trouble because, quote, he gave an interview seeming to suggest that the controversial Special Congressional Committee investigating the Benghazi terrorist attacks were meant to damage Democrat Hillary Clinton's presidential bid. He later apologized and clarified, but some feared the damage had been done. Anyway, so that was, and that's when Paul Ryan became Speaker, and now he's having his second shot. You were talking about the extremism amongst the GOP, and but for a few votes, it could be a very different situation. Those votes did happen, and what we've got now is a moderate caucus in the GOP. We've got, at least by my count, 8 to 10 Republicans who are quite moderate, who are representing 50-50 districts, who would...
Or worse,
who would have every expectation that they are going to get voted out in 2 years' time when they aren't facing record inflation. And and they're going to want to distinguish themselves from the rest of them, because they know if they are associated with the rest of them, they're going down in 2 years' time. So do you think that there is the prospect of any of them joining with the Democrats on particular votes, creating trouble for Kevin McCarthy in that respect?
I honestly don't know. I just don't. I mean, it just so rarely happens in America. And once in a great while, someone switches parties. But I mean, like once a decade or something like that.
I don't mean full defection. I mean just on particular votes. But say an impeachment vote, for instance.
Yeah, no, I mean, that you can see people peeling away from that. Yeah. I honestly don't know. What do you think?
my gut reaction is that they're going to be desperate to distinguish themselves, but they're not going to want to risk it on a big vote because they definitely can't win an election if they don't get Republican votes as a Republican.
Yeah.
And there's just too much discipline, I feel, within the Republican caucus. If you, there are certain lines you're not meant to cross. And if you cross them, you're just not going to get anyone to turn out to vote for you. So I think it's in their electoral interest, at least, to not A, defect, and B, to cross the floor too much. I think they'll choose their moments. I think each of them will have one or two votes that they'll cross the floor on. But I think that I don't think it's going to be. I suspect it won't be as much of a feature as some people are speculating about.
And people should remember that the way these things work now is that, there is no glamour in being a member of the House of Representatives in America. I mean, what you do is you get up in the morning and you go to one of these ridiculous party house offices and you sit there in a little cubicle like someone working at a call center and you call donors. And you do that for about 4 hours, 3 or 4 days a week. You do. I mean, that's not...
life.
I mean, it's just an incredibly pathetic, degrading, ridiculous system. And so we have to remember that we think, they're on the House floor and talking and arguing. They're really not. And so their reality is about raising money for those things. And so the people they're raising money from, if they're talking to the big local business people saying, yes, I'm going to be there, that kind of gets caught in stone. So I just don't know, but I mean, there is just going to be that thing. There's going to be some people who try to be rational, though, and who go to Kevin McCarthy and say, "Look, you got to tamp down this Hunter Biden thing because we're going to get killed in 2 years." Look what happened to look what happened to look what happened to Newt Gingrich. And on the other hand, they might say, "Look at." Maybe we're going to lose 3 of those 7 seats, but there's 5 others I think we can pick up. And then the Senate map is so crazy next time as well. But it's really hard for me to think that they can win the presidency in 2 years. But of course, hope springs eternal, and we don't know what will happen to Biden. We don't know if Kamala Harris comes up and they consider her to be easy pickings.
We don't know if there's a debt default.
A what?
A debt default. A default on the debt?
Oh, a debt default. Oh, exactly. Just stuff like that. They can do that. They can close down the government again. I mean, there's all these ridiculous things they can do. So it just seems really fraught. And as I said, it would be so much fun to watch Kevin McCarthy be humiliated, the rational Republicans who I just have no respect for anymore because they've been wishy-washy for so long. I mean, now Bill Barr's coming out against Trump and stuff like that. It's just I hate to sound so strident, but there's a special place in hell reserved for these people.
That's quite strident.
Because of what we've seen play out. And Murdoch, the Murdoch papers are another case in point. It's going to be really interesting to watch them 3 or 4 weeks or months, and if all of a sudden they fall silent again, which they might. So I don't know. Hey, I have one. Can I say one pickup from the midterms? I know that you guys covered it.
Yeah.
So midterms traditionally are much more conservative votes than presidential years, because presidential years bring more people. The more people that vote, that favors the Democrats.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, the evolution of the parties is really changing, right? The makeup of them. And so this shift, the more I think about it, this shift of education is really, really, really a big influence. And so you guys might have mentioned this before.
Should I play some Stats Nugget music for you?
No, because I have a better one.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So of the House seats in America, there's 4 groups. They call it quartiles, right?
Yeah.
So I found this really amazing. I guess it was just in Politico, actually. But that the seats in America that are least educated, Republicans control them now 2-1.
Yeah.
Okay. The next seats that are the second best, less educated, Republicans control them by more than 2-1. Yeah. Okay. And then third quartile of education getting better, they're equal. And then the highest educated, the Democrats control 3-1. Yeah. Okay. So now, of course, the better educated you are, the more you tend to vote. Okay.
Especially in midterms.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's the thing. So traditionally, Democratic voters were the working class, the less educated, and minority groups.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that's all changing. All those groups are more educated, and so it's really changing. So now I think the Republicans are going to find themselves at a disadvantage in the midterms in the same way Democrats traditionally were.
Yep.
So, I mean, and so traditionally, if you were, say, working on a Senate campaign and it was a midterm election, you were considered to be at a disadvantage if you were a Democrat. So now that's really changing. So now that makes me reinterpret these midterms a little bit now that it's pretty amazing that it's pretty amazing how close it was, first of all, because the future of America is in it. But at the same time now, I think there is part of the reason that the Republicans didn't do any better, too, that people weren't. I mean, this isn't like it's a secret or anything like this, but it is really glaringly striking at this point that Republicans now have to get these low information voters out. Trump is very good at doing that, okay? But Trump's not going to always be around and stuff like this. And we could find in a very few number of years, the Republicans have bought into this movement that is just not going to be there for them because it's really hard. And I don't mean, I would never, ever look down on poor people or things like this, but the people who've been supporting Trump at this point really deserve what they get because there's no confusion anymore about the type of person Trump is. And I think a lot of those people are going to go back to their lives and they're going to disengage from politics, and the Republicans are going to be sitting there on a little cruise ship that doesn't have very many passengers in the third-class lounge.
Well, I would say to that, I think the point you're making is a good point, but I think that we're in a state of flux at the moment in terms of the base of each party, and as the Republicans gain, the Democrats gain. As the Republicans lose, the Democrats lose. And what I mean by that is I agree entirely with what you're saying about the problems of Republicans taking over some of the Democrats' old base of the working class voters. But at the same time, and they do vote less than the educated voters. And there are more educated people over time, more people going to college over time. Like as people die out and stop voting, they are less educated than the people who are replacing them, the Gen Zs, right? But Republicans are also taking, over time, a bigger slice of the Latino and black vote, in particularly the Latino vote. And I would not be at all surprised if in 15 or 20 years' time, we see the Republicans having a bigger slice of the Latino vote than the Democrats, and the Latinos being the biggest voting group in America. There is a long way to go before we get there. All the time there are. It's like a beach where the tide comes in at one place and goes out another place all the time. It's very hard with democracy to try and tamp down one side without losing on the other side. Yeah. And I think we're in a state of flux right now, so we just don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah. I would like to place a marker, though, and in case we're just in the hope that we're still doing this 3 to 4 or 6 or 8 years from now, that I don't think that erosion of the Latino vote is going to be as severe as people think. And that you have, there's a couple of things going on, and one is just the evolutions of immigrant groups. You know, you have that first wave who are hardworking, and then you have their kids who they're going, hey, this is your, and they go, you don't understand the sacrifices we did for you idiot kids. But then those kids grow up, and then they have the third generation. Now we're in Latinos, we're in that third generation now. So you have all those demographics too. But just from having lived in Arizona, which is a very Latino state, looking over the way the vote patterns with Latinos have gone, and even this time, I mean, you don't really see that drop off outside of Florida. But I read a couple things about this, and it's, some of these people are really smart. It's a little bit over my head. But when you really look at the Latino vote, for example, in Nevada and Arizona, I don't believe the results of that show a significant drop off. But Florida is a whole other can of worms.
Let me ask you just a little bit more about the House for you, because I'm anxious to get onto Bill's Culture Corner. Because
let's do that.
Because with Elle on the last podcast, I left the international stuff till too late, and we ended up only doing 45 minutes of international stuff rather than domestic stuff, and international is her specialty. And so I want to make sure we don't do that with you in culture. So, but I just want to ask your view about the rise of Marjorie Taylor Greene, which I feel is probably the biggest story of this Congress.
Yeah.
Like in that she is now carrying herself like she's the speaker. She's not, but she thinks she is. And the quote, which I just can't get over, which I've read out in Plain America before, but I want to read out here for the first time, is this is a couple of couple of weeks back, she said in a profile, I think that to be the best Speaker of the House and to please the base, Kevin McCarthy's going to give me a lot of power and a lot of leeway. And if he doesn't, they're going to be very unhappy about it. I think that's the best way to read that. And that's not in any way a threat at all. I just think that's reality. I think that just sums up just how cocky she is and confident she is, and probably with reason. She probably knows she's got serious numbers behind her now. And she's only been around for one term. So she doesn't know what she's doing. But, how much of a nuisance is she likely to be for Kevin McCarthy?
I really think so. But I thought that I just read, I was going to mention this because I thought I just read that she actually poo-pooed Andy Biggs and was saying, no, Speaker McCarthy, that she was going to support him. So I was thinking there has been...
they've done a deal.
Yeah,
they've done a deal for sure. Like, she didn't just poo-poo Andy Biggs. She went hard for McCarthy. Yeah, she was his hardest supporter, which tells me she's got some sweet committee assignments coming up. They're all already worked out. Yeah. So, I think she's going to be on the Oversight Committee, which is what she wants. I think she's going to be a prime person in the upcoming circus that we are going to be seeing over the next few years, which is why I ask you about her.
I think it's all going to be very entertaining in a weird way, but I just worry that I just still think the Democrats are just so bad at messaging. I was just daydreaming the other day, like, why don't they just quote some of these people just saying anti-gay things? This person's a Democrat, a Republican, quoting a Republican, and then just saying something about Hispanics. This is a Republican. Yep, you guessed it, a Republican. Like, it just feels to me that they just the way that these new generations feel about gay rights, for example, and things like this, like why the Republican Party is not synonymous with anti-gay bigotry. I don't understand. I figure that's just a winning thing, and these people who run these campaigns are very smart, and it could just be that a Democratic person would say, no, look, we've tried that, but it backfires on this way or some reason. Yeah. But I just don't understand why an entire generation of kids just don't think that Republicans are anti-gay. That's a deal breaker for us.
I've been surprised by how openly anti-gay marriage some Republicans have been with the current Senate vote about the
Oh yeah, no, they're going off the reservation.
Like
exactly.
I thought that, I mean, once they got the 10 votes, I thought the other Republicans would shut up because they thought, we've lost the vote. Let's not risk bad PR for no reason whatsoever. Yeah. But some of them are going real hard, and I'm quite surprised by that.
I don't understand. I mean, it literally is hate mongering. There's no point to it other than stir up public resentment against this thing. And so I don't understand why just every time Biden and all these people open their mouths, just say, you know what, I just really think we need to join together against this sort of this hate bigotry. Why can't gay people adopt someone? Why can't,
Well, let me ask you about Democrats then. Now you started it. What do you think about Hakeem Jeffries, assuming he's about to be the minority leader?
Oh yeah, I think those people are pretty smart. They have really good people over there, right? I mean, I'm not an expert on all this stuff, but everyone thinks that she's got a great second bench, right? Or a bench, I guess is what you call it. So I don't have any opinion other than the fact that they seem to be being very careful and productive. Yeah,
look, I don't have much of a view of myself either. He's clearly more of a bomb thrower than Nancy Pelosi was. Nancy Pelosi wasn't much of a bomb thrower. She more focused on doing numbers.
Doing things, yeah.
Yeah. He's better in the media than Nancy Pelosi. She wasn't very good in the media. He does like his talking points. I guess that's politics today.
My feeling overall is that everyone on the Democratic side is being really careful. And to go back to what we were talking about speakers, you really didn't hear much from AOC over the past 4 years.
Yeah, she's been very, I've got to give her credit. She has been very pragmatic.
Right, no, and that's
in a way
Pelosi. No, I'm sure that Pelosi, Biden, whoever, everyone sat down with those guys and said, look, you've got to STFU, okay? And we're going to help you out, but long term, you're someone who's going to cost the party. Otherwise, they've been really good. And to go back to the Hispanic thing, Bernie Sanders has done such a favor to the Republican Party. If Bernie Sanders had never declared himself a socialist, you wouldn't be having a lot of the problems you're having in Florida, because they can just say socialism, socialism, communism, 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 all the livelong day. And I was kind of thinking for a long time, it's like, Bernie's a socialist now. It's not that big of a deal, because I come from that thing where just you even got near the socialist word, it was fatal back in the day. And now they've been very smart about using that.
I reckon I reckon they probably would have used it without Bernie Sanders.
But I mean, he literally is the only person in American life who said he's a socialist in the past 50 years.
That is true. Let me ask you, I think we've just about talked enough about the next Congress, but I want to ask you your thoughts about the exclusion of Democrats. Like Kevin McCarthy's talking about banning Eric Swalwell from the Intelligence Committee because he had a relationship with a suspected Chinese spy back in 2015. When I say relationship, I don't mean an affair. People have been very vague about what this relationship is. I'm not going to speculate. I'm just saying relationship is a specifically chosen word. We don't know what it was. He says that he shared no information with her at all. He was informed by the FBI about the fact she was potentially a spy, and he cut her off immediately, and that was that. They want to ban him from the Intelligence Committee. Ilhan Omar has been accused of anti-Semitic comments in the past. McCarthy doesn't want her on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And Adam Schiff, Republicans generally hate him.
Just for being Adam Schiff.
Yeah. They reckon that he pretended he had evidence that he didn't really have about Russiagate. And they reckon he was a constant leaker of supposedly confidential material on the Intelligence Committee. And they want him off the Intelligence Committee. Okay, so that's the three that they want off. They have also said that Nancy Pelosi started it by, number one, keeping Republican bomb throwers off the January 6th committee, and number two, banning Marjorie Taylor Greene from any committee whatsoever. That wasn't Pelosi; that was the entire House took a vote, and some Republicans voted with her on that because of Marjorie Taylor Greene's social media activity in the past. Okay, so what are your views about this?
It's really hard because what Omar said, I kind of forget exactly, but it's really unfortunate given her background and stuff like that because it can just politically, outside of just being, and forgive me because I forget exactly what it was, but I was reading about this and rolling my eyes. I honestly, I have to be honest, I don't know enough about how that's been handled in the past, the history of it, but it just seems like he's picking those things to make a point, the anti-Semitism stuff and stuff like the Chinese spy when there's obviously much more serious things. So I just think those are just sort of those things that happen, kind of minor bits of roadkill. And so that particularly in the first two, I think he could probably get away with it. Adam Schiff is going to be really hard, it seems to me, because he's such a serious, smart guy.
He is. For what it's worth,
I think it would make McCarthy look bad. The first two, I think he can get away with.
It's funny, actually. I agree with you about the consequences, but in terms of who I feel deserves to be on committees and who doesn't, and who deserves to be thrown off, whatever, I feel the justice is actually the opposite of what you just described, even though I think you're right about your political assessment. I think that Ilhan Omar said some things. I don't have the exact details in front of me, but from memory, I think she said some things that I regard as being sort of near. So it was being around the mark of anti-Semitic tropes, but she didn't say anti-Semitic comments, if you know what I mean. Like she didn't say anything blatantly anti-Semitic, but she was like doing like kind of, it's all about the Benjamins when talking about the Jewish lobby, kind of, like it just kind of just,
right.
She was in the region, she was in the region. And I don't think that's enough to throw someone off a committee. Essentially, the reason why they want her off the committee, I think, is because they disagree with her political viewpoints about foreign policy.
Plus she's Muslim and they can't get away with it.
Yeah, and she's super pro-Palestinian. They hate that. And it's about her foreign policy positions, and I think that's all the more reason for her to be on the committee, to offer a different point of view. Yeah. So I actually really don't like her being off the committee, even though politically I'm well away from her. I think that it's good to have people with different points of view on committees to express different perspectives.
That's a great point.
Yeah. So I said that I really don't like her not being on the committee. Eric Swalwell, that's a complete beat up. Like this was like 8 years ago. Like there's no hint that he did anything wrong knowingly. Like if he was a patsy, he's not the first person to be a patsy to a spy, right? Unless like it's not like the intelligence agencies seem to have a problem with him. They still allowed him to do things and all the rest of it. I feel like they're just looking for heads, for scalps, essentially. And also he's annoying to them. Yeah. And so they enjoy that. The one who I think is justifiable is Adam Schiff. And the reason why is I am absolutely sure he was a massive leaker. I think they're right.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't know.
He was a massive leaker. I also am the kind of person who goes in and when people refer to things like documents, I tend to look at the documents. And these guys in the Intelligence Committee, especially under Trump, they were doing a lot of back and forth about documents that we hadn't seen yet. And then they would come out and I would have a look at them and I'd compare them back to what they said originally.
Yeah.
Adam Schiff completely misrepresented documents over and over again. Documents they knew were confidential so the public wouldn't see. And I really thought that he was dishonest in the way intentionally dishonest in the way he presented some documents. And so I thought that I don't know what this, I'm not saying that he is the worst person on earth. I'm just saying if Congress had any standards, which I don't think it does, but if it did have any standards, I think he probably would have violated some of those standards.
Oh, that's if set standards. Yeah.
And so for that reason, I am not sorry to see him go on a personal level, like as him as a person, but I don't like seeing anyone go because I think this is going to a negative place. Like this tit for tat stuff about I'm going to take some scalps, you take some scalps. This stuff only escalates and we're going to end up having a situation where we end up having extremely partisan committees. They're already a joke. They're going to become even more of a joke over time if you just keep on just booting off more and more people from the other side, especially the ones that you disagree with the most.
Yeah.
I think that they're just going to become useless. And Congress is already toothless with its committee system compared to what it used to be. And this is just going to make them completely pointless, I feel, over time. Yeah. So I don't like where it's going. And I don't think Marjorie Taylor Greene should have been thrown off in the first place either, because I think that at the time they were saying they were maintaining standards. Well, let's have a look at the standards they've maintained. She's about to be the king of the oversight committee, right? So that in the long run, it just put off her rise for 2 years. Yeah. And what for? For stuff she did on social media years beforehand? Yeah, I mean, come on.
I will say, I basically agree with you, but there is this thing where everything you're saying is probably, I'm sure it's true, but the things that she does, the things that people say and do is so extreme. And one of the things I appreciate being in Australia is that there's a little bit more decorum here. And we've just really seen these people in America, like not since the 60s when you had a few kind of radical black members of Congress saying just utterly ridiculous things. Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson said a couple of bad things, but have we just seen absolutely incompetent, unqualified, bozo, offensive people? So, I kind of think she's in that realm. These other guys aren't, but I think that's a great point about Schiff.
I think she's in that realm as well. Yeah, I don't like her.
Yeah, but it is inefficacious to do stuff like that. Probably.
You just go, okay, where's this going? Like it always starts with a justifiable person. Right? And then you go, and the next one's less justifiable, which is what we're seeing now. Yeah. The next one's going to be less justifiable again. And you go, okay, here we go. We can see where this is going. Anyway, doesn't matter. I just want to get your view on that. Let's talk about Bill's Culture Korner.
And I want to make it clear that's culture with a K and corner with a K.
Oh,
that really matters.
Do you want to do your stats nugget before this?
No, it's not a political one. We can do that one later.
Okay, all right.
Okay, go for it. So I just want to talk about two things that people might be interested in America. So the first one is Disney. Okay. And Disney, this amazing thing just happened where Disney is a fabled American company. And you've all heard that name and stuff like this. But just as a business story, it has been remarkable. It was under control of this guy named Michael Eisner for a long time, who started Euro Disney and kind of brought it into the modern era. But he sort of overstayed his welcome by 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Okay. Sure. So, and he finally embarrassed himself and the company, and then they brought this guy named Bob Iger.
How did he embarrass himself? Was it like a sexual harassment?
Well, he just didn't want to leave. Oh, okay. And then ultimately, Walt Disney's nephew Roy got involved and said, look, you're destroying Disney. Okay. And they had a shareholder revolt, and he 43% of the shareholders voted against him at a stockholder meeting, which is insane. That never happens in American life. I mean, 1%, you're always some people.
So he's gone.
So that was 20 years ago. Yeah. And so this guy Iger came in, and Iger has just been one of the greatest CEOs in American history. And what Disney had this great brand. And just to remind people, they bought Pixar, and then they bought Marvel.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Star Wars.
and then they bought Star Wars,
yeah.
and then they just took over 20th Century Fox. Okay, so in the past 20 years, the value of Disney just went crazy. I mean, 10 times, 15 times bigger. Okay, it's this massive, huge behemoth company. So Iger, so then Iger, you know, was all this thing. He had all this time to come up with a successor, and he did this guy named Bob Chekhov. Sorry, my mind is slipping. So, and so this poor guy has been running the thing, and a lot of crazy things have happened in the last 3 years. You'll remember, okay? You had the pandemic, and so one of the things Disney does is it runs theme parks. Okay, so those have been closed, right? And they also put out a whole bunch of movies. Oops. Okay, so Disney has been battered, and at the same time, there's been this crazy thing with streaming. Okay, so Disney got into the streaming game really big. They're working with Apple. They have all this great. You know, they have all this great stuff going.
This is Disney Plus you're talking about.
Yeah, Disney Plus, and then sorry, when I said Apple, I'm Hulu, and then they also own ESPN, this big sports thing. So everyone thought that was the greatest thing because streaming is just going crazy, and Disney has all these streaming options, and they're spending a lot of money. I mean, billions of dollars throwing to, you know, the Mandalorian, Andor, all this stuff, really banking on all this stuff. Plus they have all the Marvel things. They had WandaVision, all this stuff. Very, 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 very expensive things. And everyone's going, yes, we got to get into streaming. You know, get up there with Netflix. We got to get into Netflix, and everything's going great. And all of a sudden, like 3 months ago, everyone said, wait a minute. You're spending all this money on streaming content. And they're like, yeah, because that's where the future is. Oh, no, we don't want you to do that anymore. Did you hear what happened to Netflix? They lost their thing, so we don't want to do that anymore. And he goes, but that's what we were doing. That was the plan. Okay. So everything was going great.
So who's they? That's a board. The board you're talking
just as shareholders in Wall Street.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so then they released earnings a few weeks ago, and they were just completely in the toilet. And Disney stock tanked, and in the weird culture of this world, apparently there was what's called an earnings call, where the CEO has to get in and says, you know, basically, you know, our earnings went down this quarter, but hey, you know, we're investing in the streaming, everything's going to be okay. And apparently, it just went over like a lead balloon, and all these executives started calling around and with the board, and they went back to Iger and they said, will you please come back at 3 p.m. on a Friday afternoon? He said yes, and they fired this guy and brought Iger back.
So he didn't mind backstabbing the guy he handpicked to replace him?
Exactly.
Okay.
So this is just kind of unprecedented, just given Disney's stature right now. 20 years ago, this would have been, an interesting corporate thing. It's so unfair to the poor guy on so many levels because everyone's stock is going down. Streaming is a very difficult transition. You know, Disney obviously is invested in cable in a huge way. And of course, they got to get themselves out of cable into streaming. Enormous competition in the streaming world, right? They're bidding against Apple. They're bidding against Netflix. They're bidding against all these other crazy things. And here in Australia, incidentally, you know, we have Stan and Binge, which doesn't really correspond with American things, though. Binge has a lot of HBO on it, which is another competitor. So anyway, it's another one of these things it couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of people.
Sure. Because
Disney, that has been under attack from DeSantis in Florida and stuff like that. But Disney has traditionally been known as Mauschwitz in the corporate world. It's a very tough company. But on the other hand, you cannot argue with the fact what Iger did to this company over the last 20 years, brought it to this amazing thing. And it's such an inglorious little moment right now. And it's just throwing the whole company's reputation down. However, even Disney stock being down right now, it's still about 8 times higher than it was when Iger took over. And you have to admit that moving forward, if you're going to be in these streaming services, which of these things would you rather have that, what they call IP, intellectual property? And I think you'd go with Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, Pixar, 20th Century Fox. So I think they'll be okay. So
this guy that they just replaced, I mean, was he just unlucky or did he do something wrong?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I'm so interested. This is just one of these companies I've had to deal with and cover and had people covering for 100 years, right? So everyone psychoanalyzes everything. So you want the tough guy in there. I mean, this is not kids play. I mean, this is like running General Electric. It's like, it is not for kids. It is really hard. You got to make tough decisions, right? And so he ran the theme parks. I mean, he knows Disney inside and out. So but for example, like 3 or 4 years ago, he got into a huge fight with Scarlett Johansson. Okay, so what they decided to do, they said, "Oh, we're not going to release this movie. We're going to put it on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Okay. Now think about this. Okay. So, hey, we put on Disney Plus. That'll help us get subscribers.
Yeah.
$20 a month forever. Like they're gaming out. They go, oh, if we put this on there, will we get 1 million new subscribers at 20 million a month? That's $20 million a month times 10. That's 200 a year times 10 is $2 billion. That's good. But we're going to lose some. I mean, they're doing all this complicated math, right? Scarlett Johansson, however, is a famous movie star. So when she gets a contract, they set the thing that says, yeah, well, we'll pay you $20 million for your role in this movie against, say, 3% of the gross, okay, or 3% of the net gross or whatever, blah, blah, blah. They're all very smart about this now.
Yeah.
But so all of a sudden, if it's not released in theaters and they just throw it on Disney Plus,
There's no gross.
so she would have been thinking, oh, I'm going to make $50 million out of this. And all of a sudden she's making $21 million. Okay.
Yeah.
So we got into a big public fight with her. To me, they eventually settled, but to me, it showed that Disney was making the tough decisions to deal with the pandemic and the changing ways of that content is being delivered to subscribers anymore. But apparently there was this lingering thing that he was mean to a movie star.
Okay.
Okay. And this is an almost unforgivable sin in America right now, being mean to a celebrity. And so apparently that really cost him. That's something you hear about. And then the other thing that you laugh at this too, but you just read this in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times and everything like this, that there was this earnings call and people just thought he was affectless. He did not prostrate himself. He just said, everything's great. Stock price just went down by 30%, but let me tell you, the streaming gambit is working. And so people, now on the other hand, if you're a Disney exec and you have stock options and all of a sudden the price drops by 30%, you're really, really, really concerned. Of course, they're not concerned when the stock price goes up 10 times, right, over the last 20 years. But then it goes down just a little bit and all of a sudden it's the end of the world. So it's another one of it's like the Republican caucus. It's like there's no good guys and they all deserve what they get.
Let me ask you two quick questions on this. The first of which is, my understanding is that Disney aren't releasing movies anymore. They release their films straight to Disney Plus every single time, which is leaving money on the table because this is not the pandemic anymore. But like if you have a big animated movie, people may go and see it, and then you will make money out of that. Like Disney Plus is set; they don't need any more exclusives to get people to do Disney Plus. So, I mean, what do you think about that strategy? Like, it seems weird
I don't
to
think
me.
that's true. I mean, it's because I don't follow the movie industry as close as I used to, so I'm not sure. But I think everyone's trying to get their movies back into the theaters again. So there's definitely some of those. But they've had some flops. Like Buzz Lightyear was a flop, And the other thing that's complicated is that Pixar is one thing. Pixar is a special brand, okay? And then there's Walt Disney Animation, which is also a little confusing. They sometimes have big flops. But even Pixar had a flop this year or last year. So it's all very complicated, but every single one, they are crunching the numbers and trying to figure it out. But you can see that if they're desperate to build up their streaming, their inclination would be to throw it onto the streaming platform because that gets some more subscribers, which pleases Wall Street. But of course, if you're a movie star and if you're a distributor, you have a lot of money invested in that. You want the money coming in. If you're part of Disney, you want that to happen. You'll complain if your department isn't doing that well because there's no movies to distribute. And then plus you have what's called the exhibition industry, which is stabbing its eyes because they want people to come in for those stupid movies so people will buy their $9 popcorns. Sure. Right?
Okay, and my second question is, if you read conservative news, and I do, you would be under the impression that that a lot of the reason why this Disney guy was sacked was because he tangled with DeSantis and lost. Oh, yeah. Right? And because what they're referring to there is what they refer colloquially to as the Don't Say Gay bill, the bill in Florida, which was basically saying that it was stopping primary school kids from being taught explicitly about homosexuality and transgender people. I'm not sure it was primary school. It was a certain age. It was whatever.
It was very low, very young though.
It was very young. It was like it might have been under 7.
They're very clever about it.
Yeah. Like they picked an age and they thought they could defend and whatever. It was below a certain age. And Disney is a, for want of a better word, a woke corporate citizen, and Disney came out against that. And Disney are a very prominent corporate citizen in Florida because of Disneyland. Right. And Ron DeSantis said because Ron DeSantis isn't really a free speech kind of a guy, Ron DeSantis, rather than just taking it on the chin, said, "Oh yeah, okay, you want to take me on? Well, I'm taking away your tax break." And I don't even know what Disney said after that. I think they stood their ground and lost their tax break, didn't they? I'm not 100% sure, but my understanding is that Bob Iger was of the view that the guy who replaced him was too soft and should have gone harder against Ron DeSantis rather than the other way around. Like rather than backing down, he actually thought that Disney should have been even stronger in defending their values rather than taking a bit of shit from Ron DeSantis. But according to conservatives, then like Disney looked terrible out of it because they took him on and lost their tax break or whatever. My understanding from what you're saying is that is complete bullshit. What they're saying, it has nothing to do with.
Well, no, I think that happened. That could have happened too, because that was really good for him in the inside Disney, right? Because everyone who works at Disney thinks that sort of thing was appalling, and we have to remember the whole "don't say gay" thing is just such a silly thing. It's just designed to stir up, prejudice and stuff like this. The whole, which 6-year-olds are being told about same-sex marriage or something like that, and then you go, but a lot of 6-year-olds do have same-sex parents right then, so it's kind of evil to say. And demonizing too. Yeah. So, and the I lost my train of thought. And it could be that you're right that it was that it supported him inside, but at the same time, the people who didn't like him, it could also give him some ammunition.
Yeah,
that it caused this sort of thing. They didn't game it out.
Could be a pretext
because they should have gamed it out 5 steps down.
Yeah.
And of course, and you have to understand that Disney is basically a state within a state in Florida, right? They had this whole thing, and so basically DeSantis did some things to screw up that and stuff like that. But you'd think that Disney, again, I basically agree with you. Disney should have gone harder and just really made it a thing. Why are we? But I think that it could just be that maybe they just were not prepared to be on the national stage in that level. And a lot of people have been caught in that thresher.
Yeah, of course.
Very harmful.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Do you have anything else to say about Disney?
No.
Okay. Well, let me do a stats nugget.
Okay.
And then,
Ooh, yeah,
then we have the second part of Culture Korner. It's time for Stats Nuggets. Stats Nuggets. Okay. Disney exists in some form in California. So that's my segue. In Anaheim, California, even what's called Disney World. Is that it? Yep. Okay. All right. This is about California. You might get the impression, depending on which newspapers you read, that California is like a hellhole. It's like a dystopia. Let me give you some numbers. In 2015, California had the 7th biggest economy in the world in 2015. Then it passed Brazil and France. And then it passed the UK in 2017. And it just passed Germany. It is now the number 4 economy in the world. After America, China, and Japan.
Wow.
Now it's still a little way behind Japan. It's at $4.3 trillion. Japan's at $5.5 trillion. So it's going to take a little while for them to catch Japan. But California is a big economy. That's number 1. Number 2, bear in mind that California only has 40 million people as well, which sounds like a lot to Australians, but on the world stage, that's not many people. Germany has 83 million people. Japan has 125 million people. They're the guys they're tangoing with there, and those are the most successful countries of that class. And California has just diddled Germany with twice the population and is on their way to diddling Japan with 3 times their population. Especially they're strong in the tippy top. Right? California has $379 billion companies compared to Germany, which has $155 billion companies.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Amongst those companies, this is according to Bloomberg, California revenues and market capitalization rose 147% and 117% over the last couple of years. Germany, their billion-dollar companies grew 41% and 34%. California's unemployment rate is 3.9% as well, which is, needless to say, very low by world standards as well. Now, yes, I'm not saying California is without its problems. Like the tippy top bit has a flip side, which is very high income inequality. It has extremely high income inequality. I think it's the highest in America as far as income inequality goes, because they have these very, very rich people and huge numbers of homeless people, which we're all aware of, I think. But the fact is that it is an absolute powerhouse, and don't have anyone suggest otherwise, especially Texas. California is a very, very, very big state economically. And I just wanted to throw that out there.
That's so great because I'm a Californian. So, I lived in San Francisco. I lived in the East Bay for a long time. Then I lived in San Francisco for a long time. So, and I grew up there when I was very young as well. So, in Arizona, it was this trope in Arizona that, oh yeah, people are just leaving California because they're just, and it's like, yeah, California, like, I mean, it's just, you know what I mean? It's like this little mouse, sitting on the ass of a big elephant saying, oh yeah, that elephant doesn't know what he's doing, stuff like that. And what, almost 20 years ago now, there was Gray Davis. There was a huge crisis in California for all sorts of complicated reasons. A lot of it brought on by Republicans, Proposition 13, which undermined the state's tax base and threw it into a tizzy and stuff like that. There was some bad management, bad politicians and stuff like that. Mostly Republicans. And then finally, kind of under Schwarzenegger, I have to say, he was a little crazy, but things started righting itself. And of course, now it's doing very, very well. I have to say, though, there are some very serious problems. I haven't been in San Francisco for a while, but all my old friends who just say, it was traditionally in San Francisco that you would walk, I worked in San Francisco during the first internet era. So, and you'd literally be stepping over homeless people on the streets. I hate to say this on the radio, on the podcast like this, but it wasn't unusual to see someone defecating on the street, sometime in front of a swanky hotel.
It is.
California, San Francisco. You know how Republicans always say, oh, these Democrat-controlled cities are dead. San Francisco is a very, very, very badly run city. Dan Feinstein was a terrible mayor. Willie Brown was a terrible mayor. They gave away everything to the unions. So many things are so wrong in that city, victimizing poor people. And in the most, it wasn't even corrupt. It was just like, oh yeah, let people build as many things as they want, buildings. We'll give them tax breaks. We're not even going to get the taxes from the big buildings, and it's going to cause all these other problems. So that, I think, is the valid criticism. And Los Angeles, I don't know well enough. Los Angeles is an ungovernable place. So I'm surprised that it's still standing in any case, because it's a very, very, very difficult city to visit, to live in. San Diego, it's always had Republican mayors, always done well. So it's kind of, and then of course Silicon Valley, which is south of San Francisco, that's doing great.
Yeah.
On the other hand, like there's a house that when I lived in growing up that was about the size of the studio, and I look it up occasionally. It's been selling for like $1.5 million in Santa Clara. Okay, that's what's happening in San Jose.
I was just going to say that the poop on the streets thing in San Francisco is definitely an issue. I've read a lot about that.
Yeah, it's just, no, and like the Mission, which when I was there was totally gentrified. You had some of the best restaurants in California on Mission and Valencia. Now everyone just says it's completely, you just would never, ever, ever want to go there. There's a real problem in San Francisco in that you can't do anything about the homeless because there's this radicalized left that will stop it. They'd say, look, it's totally okay for 17-year-olds to shoot up on the street. And you'd say, well, no, it's not actually. It's like, oh my God, the rights and stuff like this. And so what it does is it paralyzes it. And it's been very, very difficult for people to, it's really interesting because I'm a Berkeley person, so I like the East Bay, Oakland, Berkeley is what I like. And San Francisco, you go over there, and for all its reputation, it's not a smart city. And the theater isn't good, the journalism isn't good. They really lucked out with the internet coming along, because when I moved back there, because I lived in the East Bay and I went to Chicago for a long time, and I kind of got toughened up. And so when I came back, I would just look around and go, how do you people feed and clothe yourselves? And the story I always tell people is I used to get my hair cut by a woman in the Haight, and she, you just kind of talk, and I worked at a local newspaper, so she knew who I was and stuff like that. And I'd say, well, what are you doing? And she's like, I guess she's an actress or something. And so one time I went in there, so what are you doing now? She goes, well, I'm writing a play. And I go, oh, that's so great. What's your play about? And she's cutting my hair, and she says, well, I was going to take a class, but it's summer. And that's what San Francisco is. Sure. It's when you meet people and they say, what are you doing? Oh, I'm writing a play. And you go, what are you doing? They're like, Well, I was going to take a class, but I decided not to. That's like San Francisco. So that's, to me, the problem with San Francisco and Northern California. To some extent, Los Angeles, actually, people work. So that's the story of California, but it's a very impressive place.
I feel like the weather in San Francisco doesn't help them because it's such good weather. Like, it doesn't seem to ever get cold. Like, so
in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Oh, no. It's cold in summer. Yeah. You know what Mark Twain said? He said the coldest winter I ever spent was the summer in San Francisco. And like, for example, you can be on San Francisco Bay going to Alcatraz on a boat at Christmas, and it's nice.
Yeah.
But San Francisco, it has microclimates. Yeah. So you can be in a certain area, it's nice and warm, and then you go over a hill and you're in what's called the Richmond, and you have this fog coming in.
Yeah.
But the East Bay, it's like the East Bay is sort of like Australia. You know, it's just beautiful there all the time.
Yeah. Anyway, this is not California Corner. This is Culture Corner.
Okay, so one more thing. Hall of Fame.
Yes, tell me about it.
So, and I did not find out yet when they're going to broadcast a Hall of Fame induction ceremony, but I assume it's going to turn up on Stan or Binge really soon. Sure. But it happened like 2 weeks ago in America, and it was broadcast on HBO the other night. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is super interesting. I hate the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I've railed against it my whole life. I do a list for New York Magazine, Vulture website, and it's every artist in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ranked in order from best to worst.
Is this the 38,000 word article?
Okay. And I update it and interview people. So it tells you the whole history of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I've interviewed everyone, got all these naughty stories about it. You also learn the whole history of rock and roll. Okay. And then, because, it starts out with Chuck Berry, Beatles, Bob Dylan, and then you get to the really rough people who shouldn't be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
We are definitely putting that link in the homework. So make sure you have a look at Bill's 38,000 word opus on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
And I should warn people, the second half is more fun because that's when you start writing about Lionel Richie and Duran Duran and Bon Jovi and stuff like that.
Look, I'll defend Duran Duran.
Oh, will you?
I will defend them, but I won't do it now because I'll get in the way of your what you're telling us. But after you're finished, I'll tell you why I defend Duran Duran in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Okay.
Well, in a Hall of Fame, maybe not rock and roll. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. So anyway, the only point I would bring up about it is that there was a lot of problems with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because there's all these industry insiders. The guy who owned Atlantic Records, Ahmet Erdogan, and Jan Wenner, the publisher of Rolling Stone magazine, who always wanted to just be a big rich guy and run around with rich rock stars. And he finally got his wish. And so he became this big industry fat cat. And so people like me on the outside would always say, look, there shouldn't be a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's nothing less rock and roll than a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Great call.
This whole thing is ridiculous, right? So now you go on, so you blink, say, and 25 years went by, and everything you predicted was bad. It was just, they just have all these ways, and people, they'd get Hall & Oates to come in and introduce certain people when Hall & Oates were big. So, of course, Hall & Oates gets in later, So all these substandards bands have been getting in because they sucked up to the people in the hall early on. So you have all these problems. But now here's the story that people should understand, that all those people are finally leaving. Because they're all these old white guys. I mean, there's hardly any women on the nominating committee. It's the most sexist, ridiculous thing you've ever heard of. But all those people are kind of dying and leaving.
Yeah.
Okay. So now there's been a huge change in the last 5 years to utter crass commerciality. Okay. So Whitney Houston is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Lionel Richie is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yeah. So those people, nothing against them, they're great. They're good pop artists if you like them, but they're just not rock and roll.
Not rock and roll. Okay,
and I'm not drawing lines.
Yeah, okay,
I mean,
fair
rock
enough.
and roll is like the Carpenters should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Oh.
Okay, but Whitney Houston, she's just a pop singer. I mean, then what? Celine Dion. I mean, where's the limit there? And then
are they meant to be lines? Is it meant to be exclusively rock and roll?
Well, when rock and yes, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Okay,
And it's nothing. I mean, and the thing is Whitney Houston sold so many records. She got Billboard Awards. She got Grammys. She got American Music Awards. She makes so much money. All those people, they have so much money, so much SEX. They get to do anything they want to do. And then someone comes along, they deserve to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's like, no, they're not influential. The world would not be any different if Lionel Richie had not lived.
If you look, I'm not going to defend Lionel Richie. If you drew a line and said only rock and roll or only rock gets in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, don't we have a problem that there isn't much rock anymore? Like you're going to...
that's another... Right.
Then 20 or 30 years' time, you go, well, there's going to be no one for the rock and roll... No one new in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because there's no one new who's successful in rock.
You've put your finger on another big problem because like there's the White Stripes, Wilco, Beck. Those are like the only kind of major rock bands that aren't in, and there aren't any more.
Yeah.
But they've done pretty well with hip hop. Like I don't necessarily agree with Jay-Z or something like that, but Biggie's in, Jay-Z, people like that.
According to you, they shouldn't be in because they're not rock and roll.
Oh no, they're totally rock. They're totally fine.
You think Jay-Z's rock?
Well, yeah, falling under that umbrella. Like there's a thing about when you get to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on your first year of eligibility, second, 10th year of eligibility. I don't think he and Biggie should be in on their first year of eligibility, but they're certainly legitimate. I mean, they're radical, they're confrontational, they're not nice.
I know, but they don't have guitars.
Yeah, no, I don't draw that. I mean, NWA's in. I hate NWA, but you know, Grandmaster Flash. I mean, those are just unbelievably great artists.
Oh, yeah.
That's a big tent.
No, I'm a big hip hop man. I'm just saying that I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying if you're drawing a line of saying there's got to be rock and roll, like Jay-Z is not rock and roll.
Oh, right. My line, I'm sorry. On my line, I'm drawing it on pop music. There's always been pop music.
Okay.
There's been Tony Bennett, Barbra Streisand, Frank Sinatra, Celine Dion. There's always been pop music. Pop music is great. That we all know what pop music. There's these lyrical tropes. My baby left me. My baby came back. I'm sad. I'm happy. Those are all things that are very conventional. They're all based on emotion and simple. And you can be a pop artist who's a great artist and deserves to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But I don't think Lionel Richie hits that. So that's what's happening in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame now. You have the whole thing with Duran Duran is they're like Queen. They're just like a bad rock band. And so that I don't think you should put bad rock bands in.
Sorry, did you just say you think Queen are a bad rock band?
Oh yeah, Queen's the most overrated band in the history of pop music.
Whoa! Okay.
You don't think so?
Emails to Bill, not to me. Queen have got so many great songs.
Oh, and they're really bad people too. You know, they violated the boycott of South Africa. They played in the Sun City.
They're not my best friends. I'm just saying they've got lots of good songs, and surely they qualify as rock, don't they?
Oh yeah, no, I just think they're bad. I think they're a bad rock band.
Wow.
But they played in Sun City, and then the other thing, you know, you can tell I care about like gay rights and stuff like this. That when Freddie Mercury died, they did the big memorial to Freddie. I don't know if you remember that. It might be too young for you.
I remember when he died.
They didn't talk about AIDS and they didn't talk about homosexuality during that whole thing. Every major rock star in the world came there, and not a single one of them said Freddie Mercury was gay, and that's okay, and that he died of AIDS, and that's okay, and we should love people who are dying on the street unloved and covered with lesions. Okay. No one had the guts to say that. Like everyone pretended he wasn't gay. Nobody talked about AIDS. It was one of the most embarrassing things in the history of rock and roll.
What I was going to say then is it's weird because he didn't die in 1984. This was in the 90s.
The 90s, right?
Yeah. So that is strange.
And they had the big memorial concert, but I wrote a big piece of this because I watched it and I kept saying, when are they going to start saying that there are people dying in the streets? Like, people should know this. Like in America, people were dying on the streets, covered with lesions, shunned by their family and friends, and nobody would touch them.
Yeah.
Okay, it happened all across the country. There was a president, Ronald Reagan. He didn't mention AIDS, and there's a terrible thing. And like, and so when people challenge me on this, I say, "Do you remember Hitler's Pope?" I forget his name, Pius XII or whatever. Vaguely, so when Hitler came on, and so a lot of people said that he negotiated with Hitler and didn't get in his way and stuff like this. And so the argument from his side is that, look, it was Hitler. He had to do what he could. He negotiated with him. He tried to protect. And my position is that when you're the Pope, life is really nice. You get those cool robes. You get to live in the Vatican and all that stuff. It's like really great. And the only bad thing about being Pope is that when Hitler comes around, you stand up to him. Okay, so when you're a rock star, a lot of sex, a lot of money, the only bad thing about being a rock star is that if there's a scourge going across the world and your lead singer is gay and he dies of age, you got to stand up and say, look, it's okay that he was gay. He didn't feel good about coming out of the closet, but you shouldn't feel that way. And we need to protect these people who are so vulnerable right now. And they didn't do it.
I can't emphasize enough. It wasn't even an issue at the time. I remember this. I was 15. Like it was... Everyone knew he died of AIDS. Everyone knew he was gay. It wasn't an issue. So I don't understand why they'd be sensitive about it.
Yeah, they just didn't talk about it during the show when they really could have, you know. So anyway, those are my issues. Plus, they played in Sun City, okay? That people might be too young to remember this, but there was an international boycott, and they said, look, it's the South African racist apartheid regime that was enforcing a two-tiered system of citizenship using sticks and rifles Okay?
Sure,
and they
okay.
created these fake homelands, and they were paying all these people a lot of money. And then everyone got around and said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. And a few people did it. And Queen was one of those bands. And so from my generation, you remember that. And then the latest thing, I don't know if you guys have noticed the ads for Qatar Airways for the World Cup. We will rock you. Brian May
they sell
selling,
out. Sure.
selling his out to Qatar like one of this human rights cesspool, and in this incredibly corrupt thing with the World Cup. And Queen's like, yeah, let's get ourselves on the right side of that issue too.
Look, I'm not going to defend them as people. I just love innuendo, and don't stop me now, and I can keep on going.
Okay. So anyway, but anyway, the whole point of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is that it's really changing. It's gone completely commercial now, and it's going to be really interesting. And one of the other things they found, all the members on the committee now are just nominating themselves for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
so
okay.
John Landau, Jimmy Iovine, and they even just inducted their lawyer, Alan Grubman, into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Well, he's not a rock and roller.
Bruce Springsteen's lawyer is now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Well, that sounds like a bit of a joke, doesn't it? Like, what's going on there? How big is this Rock and Roll Hall of Fame now? Do you have to worry about the lawyer in your 38,000?
He's like in the non-performers. I just do the performers.
Okay. All right. Now, we mentioned that we were going to talk about this on the podcast last week with Dr. Dave, and then we actually got Indrani on Facebook brought something up. I bet you can't believe I'm actually bringing this up. I said I would. She had a look at your list, and she had some qualms. And I want to put them to you and get you to respond directly. There aren't many of them, but I'll just read you the quote.
Okay.
Chuck Berry ahead of Little Richard. Dylan, the Beatles, the Stones, half of Nashville, and all the Brits were heavily influenced by Little Richard, more so than Chuck Berry, who they loved, no doubt. And David Bowie at 21, below the Clash and the Ramones? I don't think so. What's your response?
Oh, that's really, is that Indira?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's I thought we were discussing this. It's really interesting that I would say two things. One, the numbers don't lie. Okay. And two, you got to understand that where, 12 and 17, 20 and 16, I mean, you could kind of, like if I probably what I should have done is done like tie, like number one, I could have tied Chuck Berry, the Beatles, and Dylan maybe, and maybe Elvis. I just disagree with her about Little Richard. I mean, Little Richard is like a pre-epic squeal of insanity with Tutti Frutti, but he really only had just a handful of songs, and everyone loved him.
Pre-epic squeal.
Well, I just wrote a huge, like, if people care, they can go to New York Magazine. I did a huge obituary. There's probably 10,000 words on Little Richard. Okay. And I also did one on Chuck Berry a few years ago, too. So, and Chuck Berry brought lyric writing to rock and roll, and which nobody else had really done before. I mean, you have songs like Brown Eyed Handsome Man, Johnny Be Good, Memphis, that are just, no one had ever written songs like that before. And the other thing about Chuck Berry is he had a song, he wrote about cars, he wrote about dating and school because he wanted to sell records. That's what kids like. Yeah. So he did a song called School Day. Yeah. Ring, ring goes the bell. Just get up in the morning and go to school. It's just a totally simple song. Go to the sock hop afterwards, go to the soda shop, blah, blah. And then at the end of it, out of nowhere, he says, "Hail, hail, rock and roll." Like no one had ever said that before. No one even really knew what it was. And he's just talking about kids and all this stuff. And just somewhere he just felt he had to say, "Hey, hail, rock and roll." And he sort of created this mythopoeic image of rock music right there. And then Johnny Be Good, he wrote the song about a rock star, and there really weren't rock stars like that. And if you remember, Johnny Be Good is strumming to the rhythm that the drivers of the train made. And the train in America is a symbol of manifest destiny, going across this continent. And so Chuck Berry's saying, look at this, the sound of this train creates this guitar sound, which is rock and roll. And now I'm going to write about Johnny Be Good, who's this rock star. I mean, he's just doing things that no one had ever done and creating these amazing poetic connections that no one had ever done before. So that's why he is more important than Little Richard, with all respect to Indira.
No, absolutely. I'm sure Andrani will be happy to take that on board. Do you have anything to say about Pat Benatar? She's the latest one to get in there.
Oh, my God.
I couldn't believe that.
I could not believe it. People should understand, because people go, "Oh, I like Pat Benatar." Okay, Pat Benatar is like a cartoon.
Hits.
Right. She didn't write any of her songs.
All Fired Up, We Belong.
Yeah.
Shows in the Night.
Love is a
Love is a
Battlefield.
Battlefield.
And see, I'm old enough to remember her first song, which is called Hit Me With Your Best Shot.
Oh, yeah, and that's the fifth one. Hit Me With Your Best Shot. Yeah.
Which is a really tasteless song.
Yeah.
She's a silly person. Now, here's another issue with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's really big issues, like often like a producer is more important than the artist. Often you have people like Elton John who have that lyricist.
Yeah.
Bernie Taupin who don't get in. The Byrds are in without Graham Parsons, who was an important member of the band and was on their best song. Crosby, Stills and Nash is in, but not Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. It's just
gotcha.
there's all these weird things. Okay, so so Pat Benatar gets in with her husband Neil Giraldo, and I said, hey, Pat Benatar's husband in. Okay, so first of all, like that's how ridiculous it's getting because over time it's like, oh yeah, there's this guy, he writes my songs. I got married to him. Yeah. So now all of a sudden, Pat Benatar and someone who literally not one person in a million could tell you who Neil Giraldo was. And now all of a sudden, like that's the official induction is both of them together.
That's why he needs to be in the Hall of Fame.
So
people can learn about him.
The standards are just totally crazy. And but I can never forgive her for Hit Me With Her Best Shot. There's a lot of people in there who don't like, even Joan Jett, who I know people like. Joan Jett's hits were covers. She never put out a good record. And they just put people in like that. See, some people say the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame isn't good with women, but I think my position is there's a lot of unqualified women in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, like Pat Benatar, Stevie Nicks as a solo artist should not be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's a good thing because it shows you that they are giving the awards to unqualified women as well as unqualified men, which is important. And also, I mean, it's a joke, but it's really true.
Yeah.
And so I don't think they're bad in inducting women, but it is true that there are hardly any women on the nominating committee, and there never has been.
Yeah.
That is the really sexist and awful thing about the Rock and Roll Hall.
That's fair enough. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm going to defend Duran Duran now.
Okay.
But I do caution that though that given you what you just said about the lines about say Whitney Houston, who unmistakably was one of the biggest acts of the last 40 years in the music industry.
She's really big.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're saying she shouldn't be there because it's not the right kind of music, etc. Like fine. And you might say the same for Duran Duran. Like in that respect, sure, I'm not going to argue with that. But in terms of influential on the music world, I'm going to defend Duran Duran. I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because...
Well, you dress like them. Obviously, sartorially,
I
see a little
Duran
bit of
like
Simon Le Bon in you.
I don't wear fedoras. Anyway, okay, so I've got a theory. Right? I have theories about everything, including music, because I'm actually a bit of a music person myself. Not like you. I don't use words like priasma.
We're all music.
But I'm into music. And before I was a nerd about American politics, I was a nerd about music. And one thing I observed was that it seemed to me that over time, the history of pop music, and I'm more a pop guy. Rock is, I see rock as part of pop anyway, but like the mainstream, I'm a mainstream guy, right? I'm not an alternative guy, right? Anyway, over the history of mainstream pop, rock music, whatever, it seems to me that there are periods of, it evolves over time, although I think evolution has kind of stopped recently, but until recently, it evolved over time, but there were periods where there was sudden explosions in terms of production techniques and style of music, and over a 2-year period, if you went before that 2-year period to after that 2-year period, it was just chalk and cheese, completely different songs, right? They were on the charts or on the radio, whatever. I think the first one of them was 964, huge explosion in 964. If you listen to music in 963 versus 965 or 6, completely different. It went from very, very simple rock and roll to
absolutely. Girl groups and stuff like that. Everything changed.
And all the Beatles stuff and like the folk stuff came over and all the rest of it. Anyway, then the next explosion I thought was in the mid 70s, about 975, when they went from when folk music sort of disappeared and progressive rock was kind of was moving out, and punk came in and disco came in like in that 2-year period. And that was a big sort of explosion as well. Then I think the next explosion was 1981. When you went from when keyboard and synths and like new, you went from the early new wave to late new wave, like we went from the guitar new wave to the keyboardy new wave.
Oh, like the new romantics and everything. Right?
And the 80s. When we think of 80s music, that's basically 1982 onwards. 1980 sounded like the 70s music, but like basically across 1981 there was a big change then. And then I think the biggest change of all since 1964 was actually in 1991, which was when Nirvana. Nirvana was the rock side, where like grunge took over from 80s sort of metal rock, but also hip hop went absolutely explode. I mean, hip hop had been around for 10 years at that point, but hip hop took over the entire charts in 1991. And importantly, pop songs and even rock songs incorporated hip hop. Like hip hop was everywhere. Like you had Rush, Big Audio Dynamite. Somebody had hip hop in the middle of a rock song. Like,
right. Oh, yeah.
like
sampling and stuff. Yeah.
Just had hip hop beats and samples all over the place, just exploding in 1991. Once again, I thought that 1992 and 1993 sound completely different to 1990 and 1989. And anyway, so I think there's these pivotal moments, and I think sort of. I mean, we need a bit more distance to be sure. I think 2013 is a little one as well, but I don't think there's been much change since 2013. Basically, a song that was on the charts in 2014 could easily be on the charts now, and that it's been a very, very long period of time. Well, the entire history of music, that wasn't the case, where you could take a song from 10 years apart and it would be on the charts 10 years later with exactly the same production and exactly the same everything. There's been very little change in the last 10 years. But anyway, back to Duran Duran. I think Duran Duran were a key part of the 1981 explosion. In that, I think that Duran Duran, they started, 1979, 1980? And then in 1981, I think 1982, especially the Hungry Like the Wolf, that sort of period there, they basically pioneered, not pioneered, because they weren't the only ones. There was Steve Winwood, there was Kids in America, there was a few of these hits at the same time. But I think they were instrumental in creating what was going to be the 80s sound. And I think that that they deserve credit for that. Like in that they lasted a lot longer than that. They were having hits in the 90s as well, and 90s sounding songs. Like a lot of bands don't last past an explosion. They're of their time, and then they sound out of date after the explosion. Yeah. The Duran Duran survived the 90s explosion to still sound pretty good in 1993. So they did pretty well there. But leaving that aside, just being the pioneers of an explosion alone, I think, merits you being recognised, if there's a Hall of Fame, of being instrumental to music. Yeah. And that's not to say rock and roll, but just music. Yeah. And that's why I defend them, and I would defend Steve Winwood for the same reason. And I would defend in the 70s, I would defend the people who were instrumental for disco and the people who were instrumental for punk. And in the 60s, I would like the people who, and so on. I think the people who pushed music along deserve recognition, and I think Duran Duran were one of them.
I think that is a very spirited defense of them.
Thank you.
And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is really bad on disco. It's really bad on gay people. It's really bad on anything that doesn't, like I say in the piece, like if every spandex wanker, hirsute spandex wanker gets in, like Journey and stuff like this, but a lot of very influential people don't. Now, I think the only thing I disagree with you on, but different countries saw things differently, is that just having lived through that, I just don't think they were that influential. There were a number of these new romantic bands. A lot of them that came out of England, I thought were a lot. Ultravox and Culture Club, I think, is a really interesting band. Again, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame doesn't like boys who dress up as girls, so Boy George doesn't seem to get in. The big thing to me is Joy Division New Order, which were actually the seminal people. Blue Monday was an incredibly important song. They haven't been recognized. And so again, to me, just having lived through the era in America, Duran Duran were always kind of seen as a joke. They were always a silly band. And, one of the things I always followed was the Paz and Jop poll, where all the critics in the country voted every year on the best records of the year. There's never been a Duran Duran record on that, ever, So those are the things that I just don't quite see them as seminal as you do. But it could be that in different countries, and in England, they might have been seen that way. And then finally, I would say also they were just, just kind of their value set. It's just kind of like, oh, here's a model, I'm on a boat, and my lyrics don't really make any sense, and everyone kind of makes fun of the lead singer even inside the band, kind of. They never got treated seriously as artists, so that's, I think, the difference. But that's a great defense of them.
Thank you. And look, that's fair enough what you're saying, and I have no memory of when they first started. I was obviously too young at that point in time. So I'm looking back as someone who just collects music from various eras and who knows when they came out, when they're on the charts. And I look at the band from that 81 explosion I really should have mentioned was Depeche Mode as well, which was, I think, Just Can't Get Enough was a very, very, very big song for that era.
And Depeche
well.
Mode got in, and this is, again, I've been writing about this every year, so when these bands get in, that I'm okay with The Cure. The Cure's, I think, a pretty good band. Depeche Mode, I always thought, I just didn't think it was a good enough band, though I liked a couple of their records. But again, like why they decide they need to get them in before New Order, it's just so crazy. I mean, just that New Order was just such a huge... like I think people say to this day that Blue Monday was the largest selling dance 12-inch ever to this day. Joy Division's Level Terror Apart is one of the greatest rock songs of all time. Yeah. They started putting out, Brotherhood, Power, Corruption, Lies. Those are actually great records as an album. And some people think that's because there's not enough women on the nominating committee where you just don't have women saying, look, I lived through the 80s, like New Order. Depeche Mode was kind of like, Depeche Mode got really big in America. They played a couple stadiums. Yeah. And they didn't, I think the argument for Depeche Mode is that they were the first really big band after New Order that didn't have guitars in it. And that was a big deal back then. Like, oh my God, they're playing a rock show and they don't have guitars. Yeah. But even then, Pet Shop Boys, I think Pet Shop Boys.
They're one of my favorite bands.
They're the greatest. Yeah. Those first few records, and their cover of Go West is a great, the one with the orange. But Please and Actually, I think, are just great albums of that era.
The cover of Always on My Mind was brilliant as well. Anyway, I was talking about
one of the best shows I've ever seen, too.
I was just going to say that this is going to be very, very embarrassing, but just while we're talking about this, I just have to say this very briefly, because I'm very excited about this topic, as you can tell. And I didn't live through the 81 explosion, but I did live through the 91 explosion. I remember it very vividly. I was 13 at the time, and let me tell you, the song, which to me at the time, in live while it was happening, got me so excited. And this is so embarrassing to admit, but it's true. It got me excited both in terms of that structurally the song was completely different to anything that I had heard at that point in time. And in the film clip as well was completely different to anything I'd seen at that time. And the two of them combined, I was like, oh my God, this is just so different. And it's very funny to look back on it.
I cannot wait to hear what
at the time, honestly, it was huge for me, was C&C Music Factory Gonna Make You Sweat. Right. Like as a dance song, it was a completely different kind of dance song to anything that had existed before. And it was then replicated and copied. Like the hook-driven nature of it was completely new. It didn't have a chorus. It just had a hook going over and over again. And if you look back now, from 30 years forward, you can see that hook-driven music has dominated since. It was basically the first really big mega hook song. Yeah. And the film clip was completely different to the film clip at the time, which also got replicated over and over and over again over the next 5 or 6 years. And just and it's I know it's such a ridiculous song for me to say that, but just I'm telling you, at the time it was just so different.
No, it's a great song, and I think that's kind of evolved. I'm not a huge expert on this, but I think it's evolved out of Chicago house music, which is really great to be in Chicago at that time. I don't know if you know this, but I was in Chicago during that period. Okay, so in Chicago at that time, you had all the house music stuff. You had Vince Lawrence and these amazing producers coming up with this. Frankie Knuckles, just unbelievable stuff. R. Kelly, like I saw R. Kelly before he was a child sex predator. I watched him film his first video. Yeah. He got found in his backyard in Chicago. Okay. You had the Smashing Pumpkins, if you remember. Remember Liz Phair?
Oh yeah, do I ever?
Like I wrote the first interview ever with her. There's a band called Urge Overkill. Ministry was from Chicago. But all these people, R. Kelly aside, would be in a bar of the size in the studio. You know what I mean? So it was really crazy before they all kind of became famous and stuff. So it was a very interesting era. And the rise of hip hop. And I'm of the thing, in terms of hip hop, hip hop seems so promising for so long. Arrested Development, Public Enemy, you had all these kind of cool things. And I don't like the turn it took that produced Biggie, Jay-Z, the heavily commercialized. I can't even use the words that they sing about most of the time. That kind of sociopathic violence, sex. I'm so famous. I'm great because I'm famous. I'm making so much money, which is so great. So I'm going to sing a song about that. That whole thing, I think they kind of bit its own ass. And it's kind of it's funny because when I get edited by younger people now, they get so offended. If you just say anything about Biggie. And you go, Biggie was a sociopath. How can you say that about Biggie? He was such a great guy. And it's he was... Again, I'm not going to say what he wrote songs about. And the other thing that I think is so artless about them, if I can go off this happy horse, is like the sampling became bad. Like Diana Ross is a solo artist, is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, okay? But Mo Money Mo Problems is Upside Down by Diana Ross. It's just a cover of that whole song. It's not a sample. And so I just think Puffy, I think, is a terrible producer. And I think it kind of took this kind of difficult turn that I don't respect ultimately. And then you got into real sociopathic people like NWA and stuff like that. Now, and Dr. Dre, who's like the most influential producer of the last 30 years, Chronic came out in 90 or 91. I mean, that's the... that and of course Nevermind, but you have to remember Nevermind turned the music industry upside down.
Oh, I remember.
And so you'd have radio stations, that wouldn't play Nirvana. Like I did a radio show on the biggest radio station between New York and LA. Okay, and when Kurt Cobain died, we just opened up the phones and let people talk about Kurt Cobain. Okay, everyone at the radio station hated it. Why did you talk about him? Nobody cares about him. That's how crazy it still was as late as 1994. Jeez. Okay. And then, but that radio station a year later wasn't playing rock music anymore. All the stations, the classic rock stations, finally, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, all those bands just took it all over. And then alternative rock took over. So, but then it also opened up MTV and all those stations to Morrissey, Dinosaur Jr., all those quirky, insane bands that you loved at that time. So it was I totally agree with you. What I was getting at is I totally agree with you. Early 90s, that was definitely one door shut. Guns N' Roses sort of disappeared. Motley Crue disappeared.
Yeah. There was a lot of transition happening then.
Yeah. But CNC Music Faster. Everybody dance now.
Like honestly, anyway, I've talked enough about that. I gave Culture Corner a pretty good run, I think.
Yeah, okay, cool.
You have a stats nugget.
I do. And let me just find it up here real quickly. Okay. Maybe
that's all right. I'll do do you want me to do a stats nugget while you're waiting?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'll do a stats nugget. This is actually one I was going to do with Melina, but I'll do it now because I'll give you a bit of a chance to get yours together there. This one is okay. This is about fatal shootings by police of unarmed suspects, which is a topic which we haven't talked much about for the last couple of years. Like they got a big run in 2020, and it's kind of fallen off the map a little bit since then. Kevin Drum, who's one of my favorite bloggers, he just likes to just look up stats, and that's why I love him. And he just decided, just off the cuff, to look up the police shooting database. And let me tell you what he found. Police shootings are going down across the board for every race. They've gone down since 2015. They've gone down since 2020. They're still going down. For black people, they've fallen. I'm going to show you a graph there. For black people, they've fallen since 2015 from 39 to 7 this year. For white people, from 95 to 26. For Hispanic people, from 26 to 2. Wow. Right across the board.
That's a great stat.
These are the same numbers per capita. You can see they're going down right across the board. Black Lives Matter worked. And it didn't just work for black people. It worked for everyone. For those people who like to say all lives matter, well, it worked for all lives. Yeah. It worked. Yeah. So I think we should just recognize that. Well done.
That's really great. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so my stats nugget has to do with Kirsten Cinema.
Stats nugget.
Okay, so the number is 37.
Okay.
And do you know what that is?
That's her age? I don't know.
No. That's the percentage of Democrats who view her favorably.
Oh, that's a bad number.
And I'm sorry, what party is she in again?
She's a Democrat. And she's running for re-election in 2 years.
In 2 years, right. Yeah. And there was actually I had this marked from a while back, but there was one about 6 months ago that had her approval rating in Democrats like at the single digits, which people in Arizona keep citing, but I don't know if that's really realistic. But Slate did a hilarious. I was really interested in this because I was talking to a political person in Arizona the other day because there's this congressperson called Ruben Gallego.
Gallego, who's going to primary her. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And he's an amazing guy. He was in the Iraq War. He's super, super smart. And so everyone expects that he's going to as his friend who's in politics, or in Republican politics, actually said he's going to totally smoke her. My friend there is really interesting. He's in Republican politics, and so he was going to see Trump speak one day. Okay, so I went along with him. This is during his campaign, okay, which was unbelievably chaotic, as you can imagine. So we were in the VIP section because he's a VIP Republican, and then they came down. They said, "Do you want to sit on stage?" Like, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there is actually a town hall with Sean Hannity and Trump and Arpaio and the idiot governor of Arizona at the time. I forget her name.
Jan Brewer.
Yeah. And you can see us behind them in the recording. Isn't that great?
You look starry-eyed.
Yeah, I was just so happy to be there. So anyway, so Slate did a analysis of some polls on her, and it's such a great piece, and I wanted to call everyone's attention by it. It's by Dan Coys in September 22nd, 2022.
Yeah.
And the thing is it has her favorability ratings with all these different groups. Okay. Voters 18 to 49, voters above 50, Democrats, independents, Republicans, women over 50, men over 50, college degrees, non-college degrees, white, Hispanic, black, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
What's amazing about it is, I don't know if we can get this on the screen.
Wow.
They are all the same. Let's see if we can
I'll
get this
put
on
up
here.
on the screen. If you want to have a look at the article, I'll put in the notes, but I'll put up on the screen right
And
now.
basically,
so
basically the favorable rating is basically between 36 and 41, and the unfavorable is between 51 and 58.
Yeah.
Okay, and every single thing. So that is really, really remarkable. I didn't do a whole bunch of research on this, but I can't ever remember seeing anyone that polarized
amongst their own party. Yeah.
And and surprisingly, the only group that she has, 51-41 even among independents. So she just does not seem to have a base, and I'm not sure what she's going to do. The only thing she's going to have is a war chest, probably from the people whose interests she's been supporting.
Yes.
But you can also maybe see them walking away, particularly if she loses the primary. And I can't imagine her trying to do an independent. No one's going to give her money for an independent or something like that. So she's a very, very curious figure, I have to say. I don't really, every time I talk to people, they just kind of, and I think I told you that I interviewed her briefly for a story on her election with McSally a while back. And, she was very opaque, and, both those candidates I thought at the time were pretty awful, but McSally was so unpleasant that I thought, okay, well, but I didn't think Sinema was going to win. That's the other thing. So it's remarkable she won. But I think that Arizona is going to, the mean in Arizona is actually moving toward more purple, and I think it's going to revert more to the mean next time. And I still don't quite understand why the Republicans did as well as they did this time. It seems odd to me because, you do have a less educated Republican base in Arizona. You have an energized Latino base, but even Mark Kelly, he didn't. There was talk that Mark Kelly was going to run away by 2 digits.
Yeah.
So that's the one little worrisome thing. But I'll bet you anything that the state gets more and more purple next time, and that she gets knocked out in the primary, and then I think Ruben Gallo should do a good job.
Yeah. Look, I'm sure she'll be struggling in 2024. I'm not surprised. I'm going to say I don't think it was surprising, the results in Arizona, given that only was it 6 years ago they elected their first statewide Democrat. Like, it was quite recent, and like they've only just moved into purple territory. They were very red until quite recently, and America's in the middle of this massive inflation. The inflation spike, it's like you would expect a state that's only just become purple to become quite red in this.
Yeah.
In this environment.
That's true. Yeah,
I think it's because of their terrible candidates that the Democrats won it all.
And actually, there's a footnote to Arizona. This is what I was getting at too. Is that so the Democrats took over all the top positions, which again I think has happened since the 40s, right? So one race that didn't get much attention was the state head of states, the superintendent of public instruction. Okay, head of schools for the state. Okay, his name was Bill Horn. Okay. He used to be Attorney General.
Yeah.
Okay, this is an article I'm going to write something because you hear about cancel culture.
You do.
People do one little thing
Yeah.
and they get drummed out of the world. It's not fair. It's terrible.
Okay,
And it's taking
where's this
over and
going?
it's really bad. Okay, so Bill Horn. So I was following this, and so I started reading about this race. And the Arizona Republic is the largest newspaper in Arizona, and so I read the big profile of him. I read the big story they wrote on the race, and I read some other thing, everything you need to know about Bill Horn, articles, stuff like that. So I found like 3 or 4 big articles about him that had been written before the race. Okay, what none of the articles said, okay, is that 6 or 8 years ago, when he was Attorney General, he was, I'm trying to think of what the word is, let's just say boffing, one of the people who worked in his office, one of his assistants when he was Attorney General.
Yep.
Did I mention he was married?
No, you didn't.
Okay.
Okay.
So he was also being investigated for campaign corruption, misappropriation of public funds, stuff like that. So
he's done more than one thing.
So the FBI was following him.
Okay.
Okay. Watching him. Okay. So the FBI is trailing him and wiretapping and stuff like this. So one day at the office, he gets into his gold Jaguar.
Yeah.
Okay. Drives somewhere, meets someone in another car who was the person in his office he was boffing. Okay. Dumps his gold Jaguar, jumps into her car, but he's driving. Okay. She's got a Ford Fiesta or something like that.
Sure.
I'm going to get this wrong, but let's just say they went to Chipotle.
Sure.
Okay, this is for lunch.
I could understand that if they did. Yeah.
And they go to her place for lunch.
Yeah.
Okay. When they leave her place, he's driving.
Yeah.
He smashes into another car in the parking lot of her house, of her apartment building.
Yeah.
Okay. And drives off. Okay. So this caused a little bit of scandal. And I would just like to point out that those 4 articles that I found in the Arizona Republic about this guy running for office didn't mention that.
Wow.
And I think it's interesting.
I think that's worth mentioning.
Okay. So I just want to point out that sometimes that those of you who are fighting against cancel culture, had this big success in Arizona, and he won by 167 votes or something ridiculous. So he was the one statewide office Republican who got in and managed to do it by the local paper not mentioning that. And Dan Quayle, remember Dan Quayle?
I remember Dan Quayle.
He had a son called
Mr. Quayle.
Phil Quayle or something like that.
Sure.
Okay, he ran for Congress, probably in 2008, something like that. And the way he got into office, he ran this thing. He said, "I think Barack Obama is the worst president in American history." Okay, stuff like that. So during his campaign, in the Republican primary, it turned out that he wrote for a kind of porny website. He had a friend that put up this website with a lot of pictures of women's breasts and was all very dirty. And it was called the Dirty Something or Other. And it turned out that this guy, Dan Quayle's son, was writing for it and helped him set it up. Okay. So the Arizona Republic, nicely, I thought, given that Dan Quayle is a scion of the Pulliam family, which owned the Arizona Republic, didn't mention it.
Very obliging.
So he won the Republican primary with 19% of the vote in an 8-person race. And then he got elected and he got thrown in office 2 years later.
Okay. So not everyone's getting cancelled is the takeaway.
Cancel culture.
Okay, we got 12 minutes left. So I'm gonna try and Barney through this last section here. Jump in whenever you want, but I'm gonna try and go as fast as I can because I'll try and cram it in before you have to go. Yeah, exactly. What I want to do is just detail for you guys quickly some of the investigations you can expect to be seen over the next little while we're away with the GOP in the House. You're all well aware of the Hunter Biden thing. I don't need to go into too much detail. All I would say is that you can expect to hear testimony from Tony Berbelinsky, who is Hunter's ex-partner. He seems very, very keen to talk. At least so far, he hasn't made much of an impact, but he'll have another opportunity. They want to get Hunter Biden to testify. That's going to be huge when it happens, obviously, but they don't want Joe Biden to testify. I don't know why that's the case. It might be a sign of that their case is quite weak, that they don't want to actually put it to Joe Biden because they think he'll beat them. I don't know. That might change. We'll see. One of Trump's aides, Garrett Ziegler, put together a team called Marco Polo. They spent 13 months analyzing that laptop. They found apparently 459 violations of state and federal laws and regulations. And they put out a 630-page report. That's 13 months well spent. Look.
So if I went over your laptop, how many violations of state and federal law would I find on that?
I think Hunter Biden seems like an upright citizen compared to my laptop. Look, there are some obviously broken laws with Hunter Biden. We all know about him answering no to the question whether he was an unlawful user of or addicted to marijuana or any depressant, stimulant, narcotic drug, or any other controlled substance when he bought a gun. He was more drug than human at that point in time, and so and he admitted it. So that's one law at the very least. But no one cares. We all know that Hunter's a screw up. That's not the issue. The issue is Joe Biden implicated in anything? And they keep on talking about Hunter and not Joe. Right? What this is going to come down to very quickly is they're trying to get their hands on what they call suspicious activity reports. Every time there's something dodgy, the bank has to whenever there's the threat, the suspicion that a law was broken with a transaction, the bank files a suspicious action report.
Right.
There are 150 of them on Hunter Biden.
Wow.
And until recently, until the Biden administration, Congress could easily get their hands on those. But under the Biden administration, they've not been able to get their hands on them. And so Congress is now going to be our subpoena, 148. They've got two of them, 148 suspicious activity reports.
Yeah.
And if Joe Biden turns up in any of them, then we might have an investigation. But until then, we do not. Right. So I'm just flagging it's about those suspicious activity reports, right? And I don't want to dismiss them and say there's nothing in them because we don't know. That's going to be the key, what's in them. Right. And then at that point in time, we'll see. Until then, if there's anything on Joe Biden, we'd already know about it, I think. And we don't. Yeah. So I think that's going to be the key.
It's a very, very sad thing. And it's just kind of like what I was saying about Queen beforehand, when you're a senator, when you're president, life is really good. And the only bad thing is that if one of your sons is a drug addict, he might end up in political roadkill, and frankly, he might deserve it. And it's so difficult in for these family members. And, there's one school of thought that says you just have to disconnect with them and say, look, we can't. And obviously the Biden family couldn't do that.
Well, the fact is, I actually think, to be honest, it plays, unless they get dirt on Joe, which they haven't been able to at the moment, unless they get dirt on Joe, I think this plays in his favor. And I don't want to talk politics about Hunter.
Yeah.
But I think it makes them, unless they get stuff on Joe, we all know Hunter's a bit of a screw up. Them beating up on Hunter just makes them look like bullies. And it makes Joe Biden look like a great dad. Because we keep on hearing about clips like this.
Dad, I called to tell you I love you. I love you more than the whole world, pal. I gotta get some help. I don't know what to do. I know you don't either, but I'm here no matter what you need. No matter what you need, I love you.
Where he just seems like a great guy who's not going to dissociate himself from his son and just loves him very much and wants to support him. So they need to be careful with this unless they can actually get some dirt on Joe Biden. Okay, other investigations. They want to haul in CEOs and financial firms for practicing ESG, which is investing with environmental, social, and governance agenda. So in other words, it puts financial pressure on fossil fuel companies, which they don't like very much, and people who aren't woke as well. It puts pressure on them. And so now I think it's strange that they think these companies are doing it because they're woke and evil. They're companies. They want to make money. The reason they're doing it is because they think in the long run, they're going to be better off for it, right? Even if in the short run, the investment might not be the best investment, they think in the long run, they'll make more money out of it.
Right.
Otherwise,
it makes
they wouldn't do it.
no sense because what they should say is like, well, you guys are making bad financial investments. I'm going to bet against you.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
And
makes no sense at all.
Yeah. And if those companies are wrong, that it's not going to make them money in the future, that's their problem. They're companies. Republicans are supposed to believe in private business, right? And so hassling them for their investment decisions, I find strange, but apparently they're trying to do that. Immigration, they want to have one on, and that's going to be huge because we've just come off an all-time record year for border crosses, which we all know about. That's about to become much worse, much, much worse. Because I've talked to you this about before, Bill, and I've talked to you guys about this, that the only thing that was holding the system together under Joe Biden was, in my view, a very dodgy regulation called Title 42, which had a beneficial effect from stopping people crossing the border point of view. That Title 42 was stopping people crossing the border because they might spread COVID, right? And that was maybe justifiable back in 2020, definitely not justifiable at the end of 2022. and a court just vacated Title 42. A court just said, I think rightly, that there were many more sensible ways for the government to prevent the spread of COVID-19 than to issue a blanket prohibition on asylum seekers. And they said you just can't ignore the entirety of asylum seeker law in issuing this policy, which I think is fair enough, right? Yeah. But while I support ideologically what the judge said, and I support asylum seekers in general, I recognise the political nature of what they're dealing with, and that this is about to become a tough situation for Joe Biden because now they've been sending away 100,000 people a month with Title 42. They take that away, there's nothing stopping them coming in at all. Yeah. So they're going to have to deal with that in some way. And Joe Biden's caught between his left-wing base and the people worrying about immigration, right? Yeah. So that is going to be a big investigation.
And there's something that people like me always say. That the thing about Republicans is that they set the house on fire and then they sit and throw rocks at the firefighters, you know. And this is a case where several times there's been deals on the table to solve this stuff, and they didn't. And they make this considered decision. No, let's let it get worse because we think we can use it to our advantage later.
To be fair, I think both sides' bases have been happy to exploit immigration. Yeah, I really do. I think the Democrats, I think some parts of the Democrat base have been very happy to try and win votes on the immigration issue, suggesting...
Yeah, but I don't know what votes they're winning. I mean, it just, like the smart people are saying, look, this is going to hurt us. I mean, because they're going to use this as a cudgel. It's in the Democrats' interest to get this, which is why the Republicans didn't agree to it, don't you think?
Well, I'll give you an example of how you win votes. Think about under Trump, the locking up the children thing, which was basically the same thing as happened under the Obama administration. Mm-hmm. Right now, I'm not saying they were completely equivalent because Jeff, the Attorney General, was named Jeff
Sessions.
Jeff Sessions. I thought he did some pretty awful things, but the actual fact of separating children from their families, etc., and putting them in these cells, they were the same cells they were in under the Obama administration. Mm-hmm. Okay, so and they made a big deal about that, Democrats. Under Trump, they made no big deal about that under Obama. So they were trying to politicize it at that point. So that's just an example of top.
Okay, that's a good example. But Obama did really cut down on immigration. He was actually quite successul about that.
He was.
But it didn't matter if they do or not.
He was. I could talk about this forever. Yeah. I'm sorry, I just want to rush on because I'm aware of your time. There's another one on the DHS, it's based on the DHS. Basically, they got rid of, that's the Department of Homeland Security, they got rid of a Disinformation Governance Board. If you recall, the disinformation secretary that they appointed, and they got rid of her. But they kept on doing it anyway without the governance board. There's a quadrennial Homeland Security review came out, a draft, that said they were targeting inaccurate information on a wide range of topics, including the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccines, racial justice, US withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the nature of US support to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And they were working with, they were flagging posts to social media companies secretly. And they had a little pipeline to social media companies, and those posts were sometimes taken down. Not all the time, about 35% of the time they were taken down. So there was some autonomy from the social media companies, but they were still trying. Yeah. Right, and they want to take it further. They talked about in this quadrennial review that they want to work on that they want to work in partnerships with other companies as well. And so there's a question: how is this the DHS's job? Trying to police misinformation according to them about the Afghanistan withdrawal. Yeah. That sounds kind of political, right? And so anyway, the Republicans are quite keen to investigate that and see if there's a bit of mission creep going on there and if there's something dodgy, which I think. Potentially there could be. I think that's an interesting investigation area there. Sorry?
I should probably go.
You gotta go. Okay, all right, okay. I am going to okay, yes.
Do you want to keep talking?
I'll tell you what, you say bye, I'll just finish this off to everyone else.
Is that okay? Yeah, and the only reason I have to go is that I have to get a train in, and it's going to hit my last bus if I don't get it.
Not a problem. Okay, you said bye to the people?
Hey, bye everyone. Thank you so much, Chaz. It's always been fun.
I'll see you guys. I'll see you next year.
Okay, I'll talk to you really soon, okay?
Thanks.
Talk to you, bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. Okay, guys, I'll just finish off here quickly. There's not much more to go. Okay, there's another one which involves FBI bias, inverted commas. See you, Bill. There have been a series of reality show style arrests of really old pro-lifers who protest outside abortion clinics this year. It's under a law called the Freedom to Access Clinic Entrances Act, and it forbids physically obstructing, injuring, intimidating, or interfering with anyone obtaining or providing reproductive health services. But the important thing is that it doesn't affect free speech or free exercise clauses. You can protest, you just can't get in people's way, and it has to be outside an abortion facility. Now, there have been a few cases where it looks like the FBI are on a bit of tear about this. They're often incredibly old people that they're arresting, like an 88-year-old woman was one person who was recently arrested for violating this act. But the big one that they talk about is a guy called Mark Hook. He's 48. It's not disputed that he attacked a guy called Bruce Love, who was a pro-choice activist. That's not disputed. Hook says that Love was harassing his 12-year-old son. Not sure why his son was at a protest outside the clinic. But anyway, they got into an argument and Hook shoved Love to the ground. Now, I don't think any of that is in a dispute, the part about maybe about harassing his son, but the part about him shoving Love to the ground, that's not in dispute. Hook faced a complaint for assault because of that shove. The judge dismissed it after Love didn't show up to the court twice, the guy who was assaulted. Okay, that was late last year. But then in April this year, Hook's lawyer hears that Hook is under investigation for violating the Faces Act, for getting in the way of people outside an abortion facility. Now, this is weird for two reasons. One, Love was not seeking an abortion. He was just a protester, so he shouldn't really be covered by the Faces Act. And two, the assault didn't happen outside a clinic. It happened down the street. But emails prove that his lawyer offered to receive the summons on Hook's behalf if he was charged. The lawyer followed up repeatedly to find out what was going on, and the FBI ignored him. But then in September 23, this is the year after, according to Hook's wife, 25 to 30 armed FBI agents showed up at their front door and arrested Hook in front of his kids with guns drawn. The FBI dispute that. They say their guns were not drawn and it was a much calmer atmosphere than the Hooks say. Conservatives are asking why they're going so hard on the Faces Act violations at all, especially this one and a few others that were similar. But at the same time, if they're going to worry about that, why aren't they charging anyone for the many incidents that have happened outside churches and crisis pregnancy centers against pro-lifers, which have been occurring, especially since Dobbs? There have been quite a few of them. They're keeping count. The Federalists has counted 83 attacks on Catholic churches and 73 crisis pregnancy centers, for what it's worth. I don't know what the truth is on this. I do think this Faces Act stuff sounds like a little bit of a worry, like in terms of infringing on freedom of speech. Obviously, you can't get in people's way. That's what the law says. But if they're applying it in a rigorous, shall we say, aggressive fashion, I don't know. I want to find out about this. I don't have an opinion, but this is an investigation that's going to be happening as well. They're pretty keen on that one. And finally, January 6th, this is one that Marjorie Taylor Greene made Kevin McCarthy promise that she could conduct, or that would be conducted, and she obviously wants a piece of it. This is not necessarily a crazy thing to investigate. People have taken 18 months to face trial for relatively minor infringements. There have been a few examples of people being treated badly during that time period. And also there's some incredibly punitive sentences. I'll give you an example. Anthony Robert Williams was found guilty of 1 count of intentional disruption of government business and 4 misdemeanor offences. He knowingly entered or remained in a restricted building or grounds without lawful authority, and he uttered loud, threatening or abusive language, and he paraded, demonstrated, or picketed on Capitol grounds. Now, obviously, he was trespassing. Obviously, he should be convicted of something. Doesn't sound like he did anything violent. Doesn't sound like he did anything other than be there and enter the Capitol grounds with the rioters. He was part of the riot, essentially, but he doesn't seem to have done anything else other than being part of the riot. He got 5 years jail for that. 5 years jail. And I can give you examples of murderers who get less than that. That's a lot of jail, right? It's 3 years supervised release on top of that. And he's the worst example by a mile, but there are a lot of others who have gotten quite stringent sentences. And so, look, as someone who worries about prison reform and worries about poor people getting beaten up by the justice system, I think it's good to investigate this kind of stuff and make sure it is on the up and up. I don't like the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene obviously wants to focus on January 6 people alone, but I think, like I said with the stats nugget before, focusing on black people being shot by police unarmed stopped everyone being shot by police unarmed. And I would hope that focusing on the procedures that have gone into the prosecution of January 6 would hopefully help, if it's investigated properly, will hopefully help tighten up their system so that in other situations the police and the law enforcement authorities aren't as zealous as they would otherwise be. And let's just see. I mean, maybe there's nothing in it. Obviously, I assume that Marjorie Taylor Greene is into it for politics. But I think if you care about prison justice reform and criminal justice reform, I feel like this is an interesting topic to explore, and I support them exploring it. And let's see if there's anything to it. Anyway, they're the major ones. I think there's a few other investigations floating around as well. They're like they want to investigate the DOJ for being biased. We'll see about that. Like they put out a memo warning about potential threats towards teachers at school board meetings. And the conservatives interpret that as suggesting upset parents were domestic terrorists. I thought that was a bit of a reach, to be honest, to suggest that. But look, they can investigate it. I don't like the DOJ being political, so let's see what they find. Anyway, there'll be heaps more. But that's the next 6 months. So that's enough for this podcast. I want to thank in absentia Bill. Tell me what you thought of Culture Korner. If you like Culture Korner, I'll bring it back every time Bill returns, because he's going to keep on returning because he's great. And he, as you can see, he's a bit of an expert on culture. I'll be back with the already recorded, at least 3/4 of it has been recorded, podcast with Melina for Ep110, which will be the final podcast of 2022. So thank you very much for sticking with me, and I'll see you guys in, I think, probably 2 days' time. Bye.